Welcome to episode 53 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast with Nick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host. This week we are covering the highs and lows of round 4, how close the reigning premiers got to losing to the Wooden Spooners, even though, you would have expected a big blowout from that game. Carlton and Melbourne being 0-4. We did kind of talk about that last week, but we might touch on it again. And the previews to Gather round 5 is coming up this week. So we will jump straight into that as well. So, without further ado, how are you doing, Mr. Cyrek?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. I am surviving out here in my country hilly town of NWA. We had up to 100 km/h winds up in the hills on the weekend and Friday. Yeah, it was we have a lot of wind up here, but yeah, it was pretty bad. So luckily, nothing to do with Perth. It was all the hilly region, so it didn't affect the Bulldogs match. Fremantle Bulldogs match.
Yeah.
But yeah, a bit of raking up to do, a bit of leaves and all that to get rid of. So, a bit of a quiet weekend. Nothing damaged or anything, but yeah, just sort of a weird weekend. Kept indoors and mainly just watched the footy.
Sounds like a good time. Mine was not very eventful, to be honest. I did a couple of things. I did my usual plasma donation on the Friday. Saturday I went to the footy. Richmond v Brisbane. Of course, we will talk about that when that comes up. And on the Sunday, I went to go see my friend's comedy show, which I went to her opening night, like a week and a half ago. And tonight and last night, words are hard, was her closing, was her final performance for her show. So I went to go support her. It was great. It was very cool. It was very cool to see her journey and through the performance, not just her story, which is kind of what the show's about, but also her confidence in performing. I think that was really, really cool to see. But yeah, otherwise not too much. Watched a lot of the footy and did a lot of prep for the podcast.
Yeah, it's good to see, and yeah, I know what you mean. It's nice to see it. I had a friend who did comedy for a tiny bit, a couple, one from high school, and another friend. I never got around to seeing them, unfortunately. Sort of kept it secret, but never got around to it. But yeah. So, yeah, it's always nice to support friends and all that when you can. If they're ever doing local shows, always go out and support your friends.
Absolutely. All right, shall we jump into it?
Yes! Now, speaking of friends who need support, go see your local Carlton fan and give him a hug. Because in the big rival game, it wasn't pretty. That was for sure. I was half watching the first stuff on my phone, and I was like, because I was doing a stream with my friend, and I was like, am I just not paying attention, or does it seem like nothing's happening? And sure enough, nothing was really happening.
Nothing really happened. I can confirm this.
Yeah, so again, for the Blues though, they were shocking in the back half with their movement, and very bromide in the forward half. And you may be asking, Blazy, what does being bromide entail? Because I don't know if you
sure.
even know
Let's just say I'm asking this question. Go on.
The word bromide means very cliche and not very helpful. And do you know why I'm using the word bromide?
No, why?
Because there is not enough words that I can use without sounding cliche and unhelpful to describe this Carlton forward line. They have generated the 4th worst amount of inside 50s in the league so far for these 4 matches, sometimes 5.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, these are all averages. And are least in league shots, scores, and goals per inside 50. So the least amount of inside 50s they're getting, they're not even converting for them. And only Kemp and Curnow have a goal a game. So also when I was writing this, they were the second worst markings inside 50 rate, but they didn't actually update it. The worst was the Giants before they played the Eagles.
Yeah.
We'll get to that later. But yeah, the Giants are well off that chart now. It is Carlton on an island on their own in 18th. So they were decent enough last year, but absolutely appalling this year. So that's just the summation of Carlton's forward line woes so far as they're 0-4. As for this game, it was a bit of a clanger cup. Both teams are racking up turnovers and going at around 65% disposal efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, Collingwood were around Geelong in the worst disposal rate team. Carlton this year are really bad in that regard too. As I said, they're sort of playing wet weather football in every game, really. And yeah, it was just a dominant third term of 11 scoring shots to 0 in favour of Collingwood, which just left the Blues absolutely nothing to work with this game. Even though, it was sort of an even game for both teams. And the big difference as well is that Collingwood had some semblance of a ground game. They just weren't converting, whereas the Blues did not.
Yeah, no, that was pretty much accurate. Like, again, it was somewhat wet weather footy. It did rain on and off. Actually, for the most part, it was wet weather footy. It did rain on and off. The ground was always wet pretty much the entire game because it rained, I think, beforehand as well. So weather was definitely a big factor as to why it was such a sluggish and weird game. But yeah, Carlton's performance just in general is just it's not up to standard right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the Pies, I thought, again, I watched the second half and sort of a few highlights, I felt they had a few easier entries into their forward line. Again, this is just like transition comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually funny. Carlton in the last quarter, I think had 2 coast-to-coast goals from behind, which was pretty much their only back-half movement for a while. Both, I think, score launches from Adam Sard. But really, it wasn't really much. A lot of Blues' possession were just in the back line going nowhere. And, as I said, Collingwood, at least they got their forward pressure going. Like, they were just inefficient more than not getting their system up.
Yeah.
They had good marks, tackles inside 50, forward 50 ground ball gets. All of those stats absolutely smashed Carlton. So really, it was just a conversion issue from them in the wet weather and their forward line, as to be expected. And yeah, as I said, they just got a lot more one-on-one looks inside 50. And honestly, it was a mammoth effort by Carlton's defense. I will say this. Their defense was actually, at least on the stats, okay, as they had to actually defend 16 one-on-ones, and they only lost one of them. So props to them. Like, I know sometimes in the rain it's hard to actually offensively win a one-on-one contest, but Carlton did their job there. But yeah, as I said, with a lack of system, those defensive one-on-one wins don't really mean anything because you don't move the ball forward. You're at risk of getting another inside 50 against, and Collingwood just outmuscled them.
Yeah, it's
plain and simple.
That's pretty much how it was. Well, then, granted, Collingwood had a very strong chance of just completely putting them away. Like getting 8-15 to 6-10 is a little concerning, but you can chalk that up to the weather for the most part.
Yeah, and I don't actually have the scoring breakdown, but it did seem to me like it was just a few easy missed shots here and there. It wasn't really like, I think it was just scrappy getting shots on goal. Like the Blues' pressure, it was more defensively there than offensively there. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Again, their defenders did their work. They made it hard for Collingwood, but up the ground is where they were more defensively poor.
Yeah, that's right. And it's kind of the Carlton system, like, as a whole. Like, as we know that Collingwood can perform better than this, so you can probably chalk their performance up to weather. Carlton's defensive pressure as well, we know at least it's decent.
Yeah.
But yes, Carlton's midfield to forward, not looking good at all. And it leaves us quite wondering what's the fix.
Actually, I take that back. I'm looking at it here. Apparently, it was the set shots that were already. They're actually converting well from general play. I must have read that backwards. With 3-8 from set shots, Collingwood, to 5-5 general play shots.
Yeah, okay. That actually
And
tracks a
they're
little bit better, to
missing.
be honest.
They missed some pretty easy shots. They left apparently 21 points on the board from set shots. So again, yeah, you're right. They could have really put them away in this game.
Yeah, no, that tracks. But yeah, like the question is like still asked for Carlton right now is that what is the fix to be able to get this midfield to forward sort of line firing?
Well, is there a fix? Like, because we know last year they sort of had this one-dimensional problem. They did a few things when they literally didn't have um, Kerno and Mackay, but they just haven't been able to put the same thing together because, as I said, Kemp going in the forward line, like that has actually worked enough. You know what I mean? Like he's had a quiet game today, but for a makeshift forward, like that's done enough.
Yeah.
But it's the other moves, relying on Jesse Motlop. Poor Zach Williams has to move either way, depending on whenever they're getting beaten. Jack Silvani has to move whichever way. Same with Lewis Young. There's no consistency there.
Mm.
And again, it's like, and we're going to talk about it a bit. They are missing a player like I was about to call him Mitch Owens. Matt Owens.
Yeah, they're missing.
They were probably like Mitch Owens.
The players that they lost in the off season are probably the players that they're missing the most right now.
Yeah, that too. They let go of Adam Kennedy very easily, and he wasn't directly scoring too much, but he had a lot of score involvements. And when you look at this connection, Carlton's marks inside 50 very, very poor. So it's not just. It's just whenever they are putting it forward, it's long. It's very, very vanilla. As I mentioned before with my weird little opening segment, I try to be creative on the podcast. I don't know if I went too far there.
No, I think it worked.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? It's like, these are a team of midfielders and they're paid over the moon. I know you can't have everything on an AFL list, but they're set up through the midfield and they're all scrappy, all hardworking. I know last year Patrick Cripps got a few goals and that helped them tick along.
Last year, especially in that second half, it was literally the Patrick Cripps show.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, in terms of connection, there's just not much going at all. And, it's like, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if like Tom de Koning was the highest score involvements of their mids. Maybe I'll do a little breakdown. I probably won't back Carlton next week just to give it a bit of a break. But yeah, as some of these stats get consistent, I will be looking for, a few niche stats in some teams. So I'll try and look at Carlton's scoring profile because it's just off. And you know what I mean? I'm not going to blame it on the midfield, but that is one connection where it just doesn't seem to be working as well as it did last year.
Yeah, it's a little concerning, and
yeah, especially up against this week when Collingwood bigs in big Billy Frampton to shut down Charlie Curnow. Like you got to find other avenues when you got that big lunkering toll in defense to get around.
Yeah, combine him with Darcy Moore, and then it's an unstoppable backline right there.
Yeah. I mean, Darcy Moore did pretty well too, so
he did. You will get a mention.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of, shall we jump into the individuals?
Yes, let's.
All right, so we'll start with the Richard Pratt medalist, which is a medal that I forgot existed between Carlton and Collingwood, but it exists. For Lachie Schultz, won it this year. He was the leading goal kicker for the Pies, kicking 2-1 from 18 disposals, 7 contested possessions, 7 marks with 3 of them inside 50, 4 inside 50s, 9 score involvements, 7 tackles with 5 of them inside 50, 31 pressure acts, and 419 metres gained. Darcy Cameron was a monster in the ruck. He finished with 33 hitouts, 5 of them to advantage, and 22 touches, 11 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 6 marks with 5 of them being intercept marks, 8 clearances, 5 tackles, 16 pressure acts, and 3 1%ers. And then Captain Darcy Moore was very important in defence. He got 17 disposals, 13 of them effective, equating to 76.5% efficiency. 6 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 5 inside 50s, a behind, 7 1%ers, 6 spoils, 475 metres gained, and 100% time on ground.
Love to see it.
We do love to see it. We love to see that effort. Um,
100%.
over
Exactly.
over for Carlton, Sam Walsh put a lot of immense pressure through that midfield. I finished with 31 disposals, 22 of them effective, equating to 71% efficiency. 8 contested possessions, 7 marks, 10 tackles, and 26 pressure acts. George Hewitt did a lot of excellent ball movement. He kicked 2-1 from 29 touches, 20 of them effective, equating to 69% efficiency. I had to sneak that there. 17 contested possessions, 7 clearances, 6 tackles, 14 pressure acts, 13 ground ball gets, and 448 metres gained. And then shout out to Carlton debutant Will White, who had got 10 touches, 5 marks, 3 inside 50s, 5 score involvements, and 14 pressure acts.
Yeah, no, as I said, there was, it's probably Carlton trying to find a few players here. Will White goes in the forward line, and, while he didn't convert his opportunities shooting at Sarah Free, at least they got, a tiny bit of an inkling of what they sort of want going into the future, considering they've got a mixed bag of the small forwards they already got there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like most teams that have a lot of like young, like that have like a super young list. It's just all about throwing them out there, seeing how they perform, and then figuring out what
Yeah.
you need to focus on for them to grow and develop and etc etc.
Yeah. Well, Collins isn't like so much a young list. It's just like the gap between its oldest and youngest players is pretty big.
Yeah.
Like it's what is it? It's about the 6th oldest list this week, but a bit further back in terms of experience.
Well, it's what? It's
Um,
Wiedering,
oh no, sorry. Yeah,
Kerner, and
that's right.
Mackay, and like Cripps. I like and Doc are like their like 5 oldest players, I think.
Yeah, Saad's getting up there in numbers
Oh yeah,
too.
he is. He's been in the league
Um,
for a while.
yeah. So, it's a pretty mixed bag, but as I said, like in terms of performance profile, it's definitely a bit up and down in terms of, their middle of the road to lower because, a lot of said is the drop off between Carlton's best and worst players, but they sort of had that last year. It's just the inconsistency and it's often coming from the inside out game. And it's like this game where, Blake Acres, gets involved. He didn't have too much meaningful forward possession.
Mm-hmm.
But, he was still a lot more involved than he has been the last few weeks. But you know what I mean? It's not a complete link up. There's like 2 major links. It's the back off to wing movement and the midfield to forward line movement. And that combined is just terrible for scoring. So it's no wonder that they're there because, when you're doing that and you got that bad link up, most of the entries are just dump kicks in anyway, and you're starved of a few. That's where the double whammy is for Carlton. They're not getting it in there, and when it is there, they're not making most of it. So
yeah, that's right. Like, because as we just figured out, like their backline is fairly solid still, and they can get the ball from their backline to the midfield, but they can't go any further.
Yeah, it's just they're making every game they play very dour. Like I think they can sort of tell right now that's their best avenue of winning. It's just not making for very pretty games. Plus, it's not enough. So I don't know what you do at this point. You just like cop it, try and make small changes and then hope for players coming back, or do you like try and rewrite the system and get back to like some really aggressive shootout football? Because I'm not sure that they will maintain it if they do. I would imagine that they'll get belted if they tried that. But
Yeah,
I think it's what some Carlton fans might be looking for.
Well, I guess this week's match against West Coast is going to be kind of the big deciding factor as to what we're going to hopefully see from Carlton if they want to try and actually win some games.
Yeah, because, that'll be. It's one of those things where, you don't want to take too much for granted because these are both winless teams, but, you want to at least set forward your best game plan against an opposition that you should theoretically be up against. And,
yeah, exactly right.
But West Coast at the same time will be probably thinking the same thing. We'll talk about that a bit later, of course.
We will. Jumping over to injuries, there was one for this game. Lockie Cohen with a hamstring. I don't know if it was a serious injury or like just a hamstring strain. I don't think the injury lists are out as of yet as we're recording, so we won't find that out until later, but hopefully all is okay.
Yeah, well, it was subbed off pretty early, so I think it was, probably looking to be a 2 to 3 weeker. Hopefully not longer. But yeah, that's someone who they, I know it's not the best player in, that forward midfield, but you know what I mean? It's still a piece that's missing in something that's already not functioning.
Yeah, exactly. And then over to the MRO. As I talk about this every single week, I do not understand why it is so difficult to avoid getting fined for this. But George Hewlett was fined $3,125 for contact with an umpire, and Patrick Cripps was fined $1,875 for contact with an umpire. Why? Why is it so hard to just not see them? They're in fluoro green, fluoro pink, fluoro blue. They're very obvious.
Well, they used to be sponsored by Specsavers. Maybe that needs to be
also used to be sponsored by OPSM at one point too.
Yeah. Maybe it was just OPSM. I think I'm just getting confused.
I'm pretty sure it was
exactly.
both. It was like one and then the other. But yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, maybe some players. Maybe they need to shout out some free. What do you call it? Thingos. I guess they're already free. But maybe they need to shout out some free contact lenses to some players.
Maybe they need to borrow Mason Cox's glasses.
Maybe. Who knows?
And then the last one, and
anyway,
the big one of the round, is Dan Houston's 2-match ban for hard high contact against Lockie Fogarty. Everyone's pretty much saw this. It was pretty clear cut.
Pretty academic.
That's already 3 matches he's missed so far this season.
Yeah.
That's it.
And
not a great look.
It's a bit of a shame. It isn't a great look, and it's so close together. I will say in Houston's defense, he hasn't actually had a bad record up until this point. So, it's just the awkwardness of having 2 close together. But at the same time, it's a bit of a shame because, as I said, he's been looking deadly so far. He's no doubting the quality of that pickup for Collingwood.
He's easily top 5, probably top 5 Collingwood's best players right now. So yeah, losing him definitely.
Top 5 Collingwood's best player. I mean, it's still probably the best halfback in the league. It's hard to judge this year because he's only played a couple, but
I feel like that's a little bit of bias coming from a Port Adelaide fan, but.
Oh, if you're talking about recent time, you know what I mean? It just really depends. Hard to judge because he's missed a few games, but he is elite off half.
Oh, no, yeah, 100%. Like, there's no doubt about that. All right, jumping over to Friday night's game over at Goomba Stadium, as we like to refer it to, is Geelong and Melbourne.
Yeah, and this is a very awkward game for Melbourne because while there were some stats that could have indicated that this might have been a better game, it would probably be all the more disappointing that despite winning the inside 50 count and the centre clearances, two things that Melbourne do like winning, they were absolutely smashed by a Geelong team that was pretty much unopposed uncontestedly. We've seen a few of these blowouts be dominated by uncontested marks. And Geelong were type A in that category, as well as also being first on the ground, to the ground level ball as well. Theoretically, Melbourne did defend the tolls okay, with an okay system, I should say, with Stephen May playing very loose as the spare man, while Petty and McDonald both didn't play out of their skins, but they weren't consistently being beaten out. They just couldn't get it out of defence as effectively as Geelong could have. A lot of Geelong's entries stayed in there, kept a lot of forward half possession, whereas Melbourne, their attack just could get rebounded fairly easily. That just led the Cats grind out to an easy score. The D's forward pressure, I would say, was absolutely abysmal. You look at some of the marks by Geelong defenders with Guthrie, Humphreys, O'Sullivan, and I put him as steward. It should say Stewart, but he is a bit of a steward back there.
He is.
They got a combined 54 marks, or a reasonable 13.5 each. And some of O'Sullivan's marks were actually intercept marks. A lot of them was just like uncontested ball moving marks that allowed these players to get involved in scoring by having their choice of targets with time and space to hit them up. And that's the main thing, we talk about AFL being like an insane league where, you only get minor, like, maybe between 1 to 3 seconds at best to dispose the ball. And we're seeing these teams that can set up good uncontested marks. And it's not all about just chipping it around. It's you chip it. Is there a fast option? If yes, go. If not, hold up. Get it to your next best option until you can break the line. Sometimes it's not just, guns are blazing. Sometimes it's a switch from slow to fast play, which is where a lot of these teams are really hitting, with some very fast ball movement. That's not Melbourne, though.
No.
They really couldn't get any line firing. Their midfield had Oliver and Petrarca left. Petrarca did have to go forward because, he was pretty, I would say, out of it in the midfield. They just needed some more forward opportunities. But the Demons were absolutely woeful with their outside movement. Their forward line, their back line, as mentioned earlier, could deal with Geelong's entries okay, but they had no movement from it. And the D's forward lines, as I said, they're pretty much up there with Carlton for, worst forward line efficiency in the league. Geelong didn't look like world beaters, but they simply took a team that wasn't doing that much conducive to winning and simply just made the most of their opportunities that resulted from lack of pressure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And considering the weather over there, it was pretty clear, pretty fine. Do you think Melbourne's Tall would have at least stood up a little bit more, tried to beat Geelong in the air, but they were just completely dominant all over the ground in every capacity.
Yeah, one of those things where I was almost favouring Geelong because, Geelong's forward half score was, a bit more than their back half score. But considering, the scoring profile of where Geelong liked to score anyway, to have those two fairly even. And, it was 11 scoring shots from the back half. Was that 13 scoring shots from the forward half?
Mm-hmm.
It just allowed consistent score, which, as I mentioned, Melbourne weren't getting, as I mentioned, that forward half pressure, it wasn't that conducive. They weren't getting very good looks. They were 2-8 from scores in the forward half. So they were just wasteful. When the few moments they could move it from the back half, they scored 3-zip. So, you know what I mean? It's when they can find their looks, they can be at least looking a bit more threatening. But, with that ball movement, they're not really going to do that all that often. 3-zip was probably even generous for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. It was looking like it could have been, a pretty solid game and a good outing for Melbourne. But no, Geelong just had complete control from that pretty much the end of that first quarter onwards.
Yeah, I wouldn't say a good game, but you know what I mean? Less, pathetic, really.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah, because I said, well, I mean, they just haven't had really good looks. And, as I said, Geelong did have a lot of it in the first quarter. But again, the rest of the game, and we'll say this about a lot of the games, they were pretty even. It's just both teams weren't converting their opportunities all that well. But as I mentioned, as I said, it was just Geelong were able to consistently grind out opportunities where Melbourne's just seemed to be coming off whims. So, yeah, as I said,
25 scoring shots to 16.
There's a big difference between struggling, to convert in your forward line and then just having all your scores just seem fluky, because then that adds extra pressure to those kicks when you're not getting the opportunities.
Yeah.
Whereas for Collingwood, they only needed a few to convert for them to actually display the dominance that they had in that game.
Yeah, that's right. And media have pointed this out over the past couple of days. You can see, especially towards the end of the game, you can see Petrarca's frustration with just the entire Melbourne system right now, and just how they aren't. They're not really getting enough up forward and not being able to convert up forward against pretty much every team that they've come up against so far.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a shame too, because for Petrarca himself, individually, he's having decent games, and I even feel some of these performances, this game, in like another Melbourne game, like last year, like he might have actually, it's enough to bring a close Melbourne side over the line. But right now, it's just there's no system for him. As I said, it's like, what do you choose? Like, do you put him in the midfield knowing that there's no forward to get past to? Or do you put him in the forward line knowing that their midfield isn't consistently. Well, they did get forward line opportunities. That's why they did put him in the forward line. But again, they weren't really that great looking opportunities. Like Geelong got so many more goal assists and score involvements, from their work, actually getting lengthier scoring chains, whereas Melbourne's just, led to either clangers or turnovers a few too many times.
Yeah, that's pretty much right. All right, shall we jump over to the individuals?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start with Captain Patrick Dangerfield. So he's been playing a lot more forward line minutes so far this season. That's partially due to his age. He's 35, fun fact, and is still contracted for next year. So who knows? I think he might currently be the oldest player in the game. Off the top of my head.
Ooh.
If not, it's pretty close with probably someone else. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Who.
I got a feeling there's an older forward, but you might be right.
I thought it might have been Doherty, but Doc's only 31.
Doc's debuted in like 2014, I think.
Yeah, he's much younger than I thought he was.
Yeah.
But yeah, jumping back over to Dangerfield, he led from the front as a captain does. He kicked 3-2 from 20 touches, 12 contested possessions, 6 marks with 3 of them inside 50, 4 inside 50s, 3 clearances, and 8 ground ball gets. Reece Stanley performed well against. Sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was going to say to your point earlier. Dangerfield has only played one game where he spent more than 50% time in the centre bounce. So yeah, as I mentioned, like him resting forward is just I know they have a lot of avenues for goals anyway, and he's not the most reliable goal kicker.
No, he's not. Definitely
he was
not.
Very good in that game.
Yeah, and he's
at the very least.
Even if he isn't, the one necessarily kicking the scores, he's able to generate just with his pure skills that he's learned as a midfield over all these years.
So many distributors in that forward line.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, it's because of his age that he's spending a lot more time up forward because you don't want to risk a body like his, because one injury and your career is done essentially.
And profile as well, they've got Bailey Smith getting into it now. Jack Bowes,
Bailey Smith pretty much just took the Dangerfield role in the midfield anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I've actually been pretty impressed with how he's sort of held up. I thought he'd spend more time in the forward line, but he seems to have his body right for a year out in the game.
Oh, that's good. But yeah, anyway.
We'll move on. Yeah.
Keep going. Reece Stanley performed well against Gawn, considering he was a late in for Mark Woodsars, who was a late out with illness. That was their only late change. He got 23 hit-outs, 11 of them to advantage, and a goal from 11 disposals, 8 of them effective, equating to 72.7% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 5 marks with 2 of them inside 50, 8 score involvements, 11 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, and 4 spoils. Lawson Humphreys, the sudden generational talent from last season, he was all over the ground, finishing with 23 touches, 18 of them effective, equating to 78.3% efficiency, 13 marks, 4 inside 50s, 5 score involvements, 11 pressure acts, and 488 meters gained. And then quickly over to Melbourne. I could only really find kind of one player that really stood out the most for me, and that was Stephen May. I felt like in this game he really did play his heart out, despite everything that was kind of thrown at him and that Melbourne defense. He finished with 27 disposals, 23 of them effective, equating to 85.2% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 11 intercepts, 10 marks, with 5 of them being intercept marks, 6 pressure acts, 7 1%ers, 6 spoils, 625 meters gained, and 100% time on ground. He did everything he could.
Yeah, and as I said, it was a bit worrying. I think that, again, as you said, Stephen May, Tom McDonald, probably... I'm not sure McDonald was the second best, but he would be up there, keeping Ollie Henry quiet. But again, normally when your defenders do well, for Geelong, their defenders did well, and their halfbacks did well. But you know what I mean? When there's connections not there, and Jake Bowie was okay. But yeah, a lot of the other halfbacks for Melbourne, sort of turning the ball over, sort of not getting that movement up the wing. And you know what I mean? It's just, it made life a lot tougher for those than you need to. Whereas, as I said, like, I mean, you could have put the whole Geelong Cats half back line in that. You know, Tom Stewart, Zach Guthrie had a brilliant game. Jack Bowes as well. Was
I
really
really
solid.
struggled to figure out who to put in for Geelong for my points apart from Danger, to be honest.
Yeah. And then, as I mentioned, you know, and contribute that with also Conor O'Sullivan. Jeez, what a find, you know, as I said. To be fair, he was actually a high draft pick for Geelong in the 1 year where they weren't that great. But still, you know what I mean? They let him cook for a year in the reserves, or he might have been injured. But yeah, he just looks right at home. And, you know, we said earlier in the year, like, oh, maybe their one-on-one defense probably could use a bit of work. I wasn't too sure about Sam de Koning, who sort of, again, played half and half, rotating with Stanley for the ruck position. But you know what I mean? Like, having him and, again, having O'Sullivan as that defender with de Koning, a little versatility, whilst they, you know, get behind Jack Henry, who unfortunately, as you will mention soon, did get injured in this game.
Oh, well.
Had a lot of versatility back there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Again, we may as well touch on it now. As for the injuries, Jack Henry is the big one with a hamstring injury. It is a little bit more serious than sadly we were hoping it wouldn't be. So he'll be out for a couple of weeks. And then, yeah, that late change with Blitzars being out with an illness, and so the swap with Reece Stanley.
Yeah, well, as I said, hopefully if it's just a little illness, you'll probably see big clubs just coming in for Henry and keeping that backline structure because, you know, as I said, Geelong have a bit of versatility there. But yeah, I've been singing Jack Henry's praises this year. It's a bit of a shame. He's going to miss a couple.
Yeah, hopefully he's able to come back like before bye. Like, you don't want him out for like a huge amount of time. He'll probably only be out maybe until, what are we in, round 5? Hopefully like round 10-ish.
Yeah.
He should be back on the park.
Yeah, exactly. Because, you know, as I said, we're pretty adamant. Well, I'm pretty adamant, Geelong. I'm pretty sure you're still fairly positive.
Yeah.
They are just 2-2 at the moment. But 2-2 or 3-2?
2-2.
Again, 2-2. So again, they'll want to make the most out of this start of the season to prime themselves for top 4, especially while there's a few teams lagging behind that would have thought they were in the equation a bit beforehand.
That's exactly right. Jumping over to the MRO, Ollie Dempsey was fined $1,000 for staging, and Bailey Fritsch was fined $1,500 for tunneling Tom Stewart. I have seen that. It's a very fair assessment. Thankfully, Tom Stewart wasn't injured from it. Probably would have gotten a match ban if he was injured.
Yeah.
That's
just sort of added tunneling to that outcome-based result, and there'll be another one we're going to talk about later in. But yeah, as I said, it was probably a bit lucky for Fritsch, but again, yeah, it was, as I said, it was only slight contact, but you know, only slight contact is all you need to make a tunneling situation dangerous.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, let's jump over to what was touted as game of the round, and that's the Gold Coast Suns and the Adelaide Crows up on the Gold Coast.
And geez, did it deliver. Honestly, again, I had a few games like this last year, but this is a game that makes you just enjoy watching football. And I know there was a bit of a controversial finish. I'll talk about it in a bit. Also, I've not said a single score this round. So I'm just going to quickly go through it.
Correct.
Collingwood Carlton was 63-46. Geelong Melbourne was 85-46. And this Suns Adelaide game was 13-13, 91 to 14-6, 90. So again, two teams get their style of game going in full force, with the Gold Coast putting in immense forward half pressure and getting their scoring off forward half turnovers primarily, while Adelaide were scoring. Adelaide sprung quickly off half back turnovers to find their key forwards in favourable matchups. It was a joy to watch just these two teams. You know, they'll struggle for a bit and then bang, they would just find their marks all very well. It did take Gold Coast a while. They had a few missed opportunities in the first half, mainly the first quarter especially. to sort of let Adelaide in the game. But in the second half, both teams were just shooting truly, making this a great contest of offensive skill.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that both defenses just did just enough, despite, how capable the offenses looked. And although the umpires did bail them out at the end, there was a mark to Rankin that would have given them a shot for the lead in 1 minute 46 to go. That was controversially not paid. You, the listener, have probably heard it to death right now. But it's sort of what under the radar was just that last couple of minutes of sheer defensive pressure by the Gold Coast that did hold them onto this contest. Because, Adelaide did have a lot of that possession in the last 5 minutes. But the Suns held on, prevented that loss or draw.
Mm-hmm.
And, it gave the Sun their first home win, Lazy. And their first win against a really competitive opponent.
Yeah,
obviously.
Exactly right.
Also their first home game for the season, so I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek there.
Yes. So just to quickly recap the Suns' journey so far. They didn't play round 0 because of the bad weather, the cyclone and all that. Played round 1 against West Coast over at Optus. Then they had their bye, which was because of round 0, and it was just bad timing because otherwise it would have been 2 gap 2. Then they played. Who did they play round 3? I can't remember.
They smashed Melbourne, wasn't it?
Yeah, was it Melbourne? I think it was Melbourne.
Yeah, it seemed like that.
It was like Melbourne or Essendon or something like that. I can't remember.
Like 90% sure it was Melbourne.
Anyway, so they got a win there, away from home, and then this is their first game on the Gold Coast for the season against probably another top 8 contender at this point in time. Very solidly a top 8 contender.
Oh, they've got the profile of them, yeah.
And
you'll say like the best.
Come out with a win.
You'd say this is the clash of the best defensive teams at this current point in time.
At this current point in time, 100%, I would say so. Like as much as I like the look of Hawthorn and Brisbane have always been very good defensively. I think these two teams are currently like 1 and 2, respectively.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I said, at least for offensive performance. I don't know about all round, but both have had semi-soft schedules. But
what they've shown has been nothing short of impressive.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, I don't want to disagree because I was a bit middling of the Suns to start the season, but I can actually see a lot of the improvement, especially that midfield to forward link up, which I was very critical on them last year.
You were.
That has very much improved this year. And as I said, scoring was literally even for both teams across all areas. As I mentioned, this was a very offensively based contest. It's just, again, Gold Coast got opportunities from the forward half, whereas Adelaide got them from the defensive half.
Mm-hmm.
Adelaide's were more accurate, but Gold Coast was more weight of numbers. And as I said, on the stat sheet, the Suns had the better of the territory battle, despite losing the possession count. But basically, the Gold Coast need less possessions, but more inside 50 than Adelaide to score their goals, where the opposite was sort of true for Adelaide. But, that can also be said that the defensive performances of Keane, Borlase, and Worrell were at least getting the ball to ground and force stoppages until someone like a Hinge or a Malira could clear the ball from their back half. Again, I don't think it was like defensive dominance from either team.
Mm-hmm.
But you could tell their key forwards were still holding out well at times. It's just, very hard to stop either of these two teams once they got going. I will say also, unlike the other contests we've been talking about, both teams got their wingers involved fairly well, and especially in defensive stoppages. And you know what I mean? It was like the ability to just add that pressure on the outside, so even if you lost the clearance, you'll get pressure. But if you did win the clearance, you could actually almost get going the other way.
Mm-hmm.
I thought both teams were very good at doing that. I think the Crows was mainly with players like Alex Neil-Bullen, even Peatling sometimes.
I didn't put him in the stats, but I was going to put Peatling in because I did actually. Never mind. I'm going to talk about Peatling in a minute because I thought he had a great game.
Yeah, whereas for Gold Coast, it was players like Ben Ainsworth, uh, what's his name? The other one, Long as well,
Ben Long,
who was sort of
yes.
drifting around. Um, not so much as a pure forward this week. So, yeah, as I said, so a lot of those players got involved in the general ball movement, and then obviously for Gold Coast, Daniel Rioli off halfback was their main distributor.
Yeah, I
He
think
played a absolutely fantastic game.
this was probably his best game for the Suns so far. Granted, it's only what 3-4 games, but it's probably
Yeah,
his best one
I
so
mean,
far.
I haven't really watched the Suns live until this match, so I can't say that for certain, but I would definitely say that's a fair claim. Yeah, and as I said, so at the end of the day, again, set shot scoring in this game was absolutely huge. It was combined 22-8 from 30 set shots all up in this game. So again, while Gold Coast sort of had a few more grinded general shot plays, every team was sort of getting looks. And, as I said, despite the harsh free kick against against Adelaide, the non-paid mark, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
The Suns, I thought, had a bit more reliability with their game plan. Although Adelaide were winning clearances, I thought it was like the launch and score involvements generated by Anderson, Miller, Rao. As I mentioned before, that again, I didn't think they had as much last year, or at least not against quality oppositions. That led their inside midfield stand tall in this game. Adelaide's midfield was fine. I just expected them to beat the Suns, and while they were good, I definitely think the Suns had the better of the two matchups. And yeah, as I said, I think that this is a growth in collective game for the Suns. And, for Adelaide, this is just more of, yeah, you can start to see like how rounded they are. They just didn't quite get the job done. There was a few tiny, bits and pieces here and there you could have been a bit critical of. Rory Laird struggled to get in the game, ended up being subbed off as a management thing. Riley O'Brien, I thought, just sort of got beaten a bit at times. And there was one point in the second quarter, and I think that's right, I wrote this in your notes about Riley Fieldthorpe, where he did take over the ruck contest and looked a bit more threatening with his tap work. So, as I said, here's, I think, one person for the Crows that I think will be... I'm not saying it's like because he was dropped last year for performance, so it'll be interesting to see what they do with him, but you know what I mean? Like, he's just lost a bit of threateningness with his hit outs, so hopefully he might be able to improve that, but, it makes a big difference when you're up against a quality opponent like Jared Witts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do mention Witts and Thilthorpe both in my individuals, which we'll jump on in a second. But yeah, like the impact from Thilthorpe both up forward and in the ruck was impressive. The impact from
Yeah.
Jared Witts in the ruck and around the ground in its entirety was just as impressive, if not more.
Yeah, exactly.
The fact that he's become
said,
one of the more versatile rucks in the competition over the past couple of years is like really, really good for the Suns.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the ironic thing is, he was sort of forced out of Collingwood because he wasn't as good a round the ground player as what's his name, Grundy.
Who,
So it's
funnily enough,
actually
isn't even at Collingwood anymore anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But again, Darcy Cameron, pretty solid ruckman.
Yeah, Darcy Cameron, like, easy top 5,
yeah.
probably top
So
5
it's
ruck
just,
at the moment. I think. Maybe not at the
maybe it'd be on
moment,
the
but
fringe.
if you go over the past 12 months, he's probably up there.
I'd say it's like underrated because of his consistency. It's just, as I said, unfortunately, rucks just tend to be like focused on the top 3. So,
Yeah,
that's neither here nor there. He's still a very good performer.
absolutely. Shall we jump over to the individuals? Considering we've already mentioned majority of the players on my list anyway. So I'll jump over with Daniel Rioli first. He's at my top. As I said, it was probably his best game for the Suns so far. Granted, it's only 3 or 4 games to really choose from, but still. He finished with 26 disposals, 24 of them effective, equating to 92.3% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 6 marks, 6 tackles, 17 per tracks, 4 ground ball gets, and 620 meters gained. Jed Walter was the leading goal scorer for the Sun, or scorer just in general for the Suns, and converted truly from some tougher shots. He kicked 3-2 from 10 touches, 6 contested possessions, 5 marks, with 3 of them being inside 50, 3 inside 50s, 5 score involvements, and 2 1%ers. Jared Witts was impactful in the ruck, as we mentioned before, hitting 45 hitouts, 9 of them to advantage, and 14 disposals, 10 contested possessions, 5 clearances, a behind, 8 score involvements, 4 1%ers, and 6 ground ball gets. Over to the Crows, big man Riley Thilthorpe was immense up forward. He kicked 5-2, but sadly not getting anywhere near the Coleman medal at this point. We will talk about that soon. From 16 touches, 9 contested possessions, 5 marks, all of them inside 50, 4 clearances, 8 score involvements, and 6 ground ball gets. And as we also mentioned, took on Wits occasionally in the ruck and had some pretty solid performances there. And then my last little Crow to talk about is James Peatling, one of the recruits. He was so important for ball movement. He kicked a goal from 24 disposals, 18 of them effective, equating to 75% efficiency, 11 contested possessions, 10 inside 50s, 4 clearances, 7 score involvements, 6 tackles, 24 pressure acts, 9 ground ball gets, and 635 meters gained. There was also a bit of a war between Thilthorpe and McAndrew, which was pretty entertaining to watch.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, like, technically, Mac Andrews lost the battle, but sometimes when you win, you know what I mean? You're able to give the big thumbs up to your opponent. I would say they were hot and, that fiery. A few other spot fires were in some of the other games, but you could tell maybe that Andrews is getting a bit of ear from Phil Thorpe the entire game. So, he just gets the last laugh coming on. I think Mac Andrews is just sort of working his way back into defense.
Because he was out with injuries. This was his first game back, I think.
I think second. But,
might have been. I think he played last week.
Last year he was playing in the forward line for the back half of 2024. So I think it's just sort of getting used to it, playing more of that spare man. He was okay, but he just got defeated in a few defensive efforts. But otherwise, his intercept game was okay. But yeah, as I mentioned, it was just sort of funny, that little contest. And again, as I mentioned, I think he was, no, was he the person who punched it out of Rankin's hands? I can't remember, actually.
I can't remember.
But yeah, so he did a few good defensive efforts late too, so...
it's always entertaining to see a little kind of 1v1 rivalry on field.
Yeah, there's another 1v1 rivalry I'll be mentioning a bit later, but you know what I mean? It just adds a bit of excitement to the game. I don't think, it's one of those things where I don't think anyone's written off anyone else's Christmas card list. But, it's just sort of the thing that next time, I think both players will be keen to establish themselves in the contest, and who knows, maybe this next time's finals.
I can just imagine the Players Association head, formerly Dangerfield, I can't remember who it is now, just sitting down and writing Christmas cards to every single player on an AFL list.
Yeah, Darcy Moore, I'm pretty sure, is the current
I think it
head.
is Moore now. Yeah, that's right.
Very well spoken. Seems to be a very smart individual, but yeah, I could imagine it.
I feel like he'd be the type of person to do that. I think he's very traditional in that sort of sense.
Yeah, Dangerfield probably more so. I think Darcy would probably get a sponsorship deal, probably. That's more his. He's more of a brand sort of person.
Yeah,
so he's Danger, but probably a bit less tech savvy and all that sort of thing.
All right, jumping over to the MROs. Same thing as every week, as I've already mentioned it. Both Jordan Dawson and Matt Rao were fined $3,125 each for contact with an umpire. Is it so difficult?
Well, to be fair, Matt Rao just runs into contests blindly.
That's true. Matt Rao will just put his head down and just run like a bull.
Yeah, exactly. So, who knows? But yeah, they've been harsh on it. So, honestly, we need a compilation.
I want to hope that the fines that players are paying for contact with an umpire actually goes into the Umpires Association, because the umps do deserve to get paid more, honestly, because they're not full timers still. So they need a little bit more.
No, not full timers, and it's a tough gig because you have to maintain a pretty decent level of fitness. And of course, as we know, it's a pretty thankless job,
Mm-hmm.
especially the Crows fans. They will not be thanking him.
Yeah,
Again, I
well,
think
if
we'll
you look at it in
probably.
their eyes, it's the fourth time they've been robbed in the past 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, you've probably seen the tweet, but I'll quickly see if I can load it up. But it was 4 incidents. I probably remember him a bit
It's
off the
in the
top of my
Discord
head.
server,
It was,
if you've got it there.
yeah, it was Essendon, Geelong, Collingwood, and Sydney, wasn't it?
Yes, Sydney being the first one in 2023, I believe.
Hmm.
I remember
Maybe not
because
Geelong. I think I added them in.
I was coming home. I was on my way home after going to a game at Marvel Stadium that night. I think it was St Kilda versus someone. I can't remember who it was. Might have been St Kilda
Hmm.
Geelong, to be honest. And I was watching that game in that final quarter on my phone, and I watched Ben Keys actively get robbed.
I know. But yes, what I'm specifically talking about is moments where Adelaide has had the apology from the AFL. So I've got the tweet up. Round 15, 2023, the Jordan Dawson non-free kick versus Collingwood, lost by 2 points. 2024, round 24 was the goal not given, claimed to hit the post. Round 6 in 2024 was the Sam Draper non-free kick. And of course, this week with Isaac Rankin.
Yes.
All AFL publicly conceded
Apologize.
apologies.
Yeah, that's rough for the Crows.
Yeah. And like the CEO came out and said, like, hey, we appreciate these apologies, but like they're not doing us any favors. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
It's
you can
like,
tell
what do you even do?
can tell us that the umpire's messed up, but it doesn't change reality.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like you're just pretty unlucky to get it all close together. Like you always like to think swings and roundabouts and all that, and I don't even think Adelaide play. Like, you know what I mean? Like, maybe if Adelaide were, like, again, Richmond in their heyday, like, very ground pressure based team, like, you could understand where some of these game errors might be coming from. But, like, most of them weren't even play style based. They were just flat out errors. So,
Yeah, it's
you can be unlucky.
you can be unlucky, or you can just get the bad rub of the green, which is
Yeah.
which is exactly why you reference Richmond in the Premiership era, because that's exactly what we had.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, that was partially due to their own game style.
Yes, it was. Anyway, speaking of Richmond, shall we jump over to that game? The Saturday it's Saturday afternoon game at the MCG. I was here for it. Richmond versus the reigning premiers, the Brisbane Lions.
Yeah, and it was a respectful enough scoreline to finish it. It was 90-13-12 for Richmond, whereas the Lions scored 18-10, 118. I don't know, like I was sort of weird because I did a few chores in between matches, had it on the background, wasn't really watching or listening. I got to it, saw they were getting blown out of the water and didn't really pay much attention to it. But then, they sort of came back and this is just one of those things where I think Richmond can hold their head up high with how they sort of got some of their game plan in the back half of the game going. As I said, they had a bit of forward line intensity, staved off whatever. It had every right to be a flogging against all cylinders firing Brisbane. Like, when you look at the Brisbane stats, this is the sort of game that they have, that they can, like, win these games like they did in the grand final by, like, nearly 50 points and all that. But, as I said, Richmond did stem it, especially ever so slightly with back-to-back Armstrong goes after the first half. And after that, Richmond just, eased back, a bit of control, had a few positive signs to take away from this rather unsurprising loss.
No, that's right. Like, everyone expected Brisbane to win. They weren't expecting Brisbane to make it under 30 points. They were expecting Brisbane to completely blow Richmond out of the water and use it as a percentage game. So I'm pretty sure that Fags probably would have gotten into them about that, because like they could have this early on. You want to try and boost the percentage as fast as you can, essentially. Because at the end of the day, percentage matters more than.
Yeah, but like Brisbane were like, what, it was 0-4 last year. You know what I mean?
Yeah, whereas currently they're 4-0.
I think when you go through that, you take what you can, and you know what? Like, I think actually Fagan will be the opposite. It's like, yeah, we got the game going. It's just Richmond got a bit. Maybe, again, as you mentioned, maybe the foot was taken off the gas.
Foot was 100%
Again, I
taken
didn't
off
watch
the
the back
gas.
half, but, as I said, it was a pretty, as I said, even in Richmond's defense, like Brisbane were reasonably accurate. 18-10 with 74% shot accuracy. Richmond did hold them to tougher outside shots. In fact, I was actually interested to see neither team registered a shot within 15 meters from goal. And, while that isn't great for Richmond, normally in floggings you see 5 or 6 close range shots. That's normally a defense under siege. They just break and let something close to goal happen. But you know what I mean? It was just signs that Richmond were on some sort of level.
Both
with the
when it
Lions
came to the ball being very close to the goals, and specifically the goal square, both teams were very desperate to put that extra pressure on to stop any sort of score, from kicking the ball off the ground.
Yeah, but on the flip side, 20 plus disposal. Oh, sorry, 20 plus inside 50 differential in favor of the Lions, and they were absolutely. Oh, sorry, actually, Richmond outmarked the Lions inside 50, which I found funny. But the Lions put in apparently really good ground ball pressure, and yeah, it was, as I said, it was a bit much for Richmond, who did well, but also got smashed in clearance numbers. Which, as we mentioned,
normal.
that's when the snowball effect for the Lions starts to come in, because you know what I mean. You get a goal conceded against you, then you lose a centre bounce, you lose a territory battle, you're more likely to get the next goal kicked against, and that can go on, so on, so forth.
Yeah,
so,
that's exactly what happened in the third quarter, until they kind of just stopped in the second half of that third quarter.
Yeah, as I said, it just seemed like Brisbane had their game going, and Richmond, although it wasn't the most eventful game ever, they did do well to prevent this being a really ugly loss.
Yes, I'm. As we've kind of already been talking about so far this season for Richmond, and for a team like North Melbourne as well, or these younger developing sort of teams, you just want to see progress. You don't necessarily have to see wins. You just want to see progress and development and learning experiences and opportunities for the younger players. And I'm very impressed, especially with that quarter and a half in the second half. And even our first quarter, I thought our first quarter was pretty solid too.
Yeah, as I said, the first quarter you didn't get that much of the ball, but you were converting well. So apart from the first quarter, it was pretty much a 50-50 game in terms of time in forward half. It's just, as I mentioned, Brisbane were converting very well. In fact, including the X scores, and notices that I don't take them as seriously. There's a lot of, flow on effect that comes from scoring, but it was 84 to 87, the final margin in favor of Brisbane. So take that what you will. But as you mentioned, maybe it was one of those games where Brisbane was in control, but that's not to say Richmond were comprehensively beaten. They were just the step behind you would expect to see. And as you mentioned, a lot of decent individual performances by the Tigers.
There was, and I do cover a couple of them. I don't cover all of them, but I am very impressed. I'll just name a couple of players that I was very impressed with personally. Sam Banks, I thought had a great game. I thought Toronto and Hopper played well in the midfield. Steely Green and Caleb Smith, I thought were very solid. Seth Campbell, of course, he's done well. Jacob Bauer, when he came in the fourth quarter, he subbed in for McIntosh, Camden. He kicked a goal, and he got a solid mark.
Hines.
That's right. Oh, yeah, that's right. He missed his first one, and he managed to get a mark right on the siren, right at the very end of the game, and unfortunately also converted for a behind. It would have been a funny goal to get, but again, I was with my parents for this game, and we all kind of agreed that under 30 points would be great when we got towards that end of that last quarter, and we had that kind of momentum going, and we're happy with that because it was Lions by 28, so you take that as a win.
Exactly.
But for the ones that I did write down, we'll start with Brisbane. Hugh McCluggage, As always, he put on immense pressure. He was very, very solid this week. He kicked 2 goals from 26 disposals, 21 of them effective, equating to 80.8% efficiency, 14 contested possessions, 6 marks, 5 inside 50s, 6 clearances, 9 score involvements, 12 tackles, 30 pressure acts, and 8 ground ball gets. Jack Payne was very important in defense. I noticed him a lot. He put on a ton of pressure against Tom Lynch and also Seth Campbell as well. He finished with 17 touches, 14. Granted, that was also tied. He was also working alongside Harris Andrews to put pressure on those two as well. But so they kind of rotated in and out. But he finished with 17 touches, 14 of them effective, equating to 82.4% efficiency, 6 intercepts, 8 marks, 3 score involvements, 9 1%ers, and 9 spoils. Will Ashcroft distributed well. He kicked 2 goals from 24 disposals, 18 of them effective, equating to 75% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 5 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, 15 pressure acts, and 472 meters gained. And before I go over to the Richmond players, the rising star has been announced, and it is Levi Ashcroft who won that. Levi finished with, if I can find it here,
22 possessions, 4 marks, 1 goal, 2, 7 contested possession for the simple stats.
They didn't even write it down in the article where it kind of talks about him. 22 disposals, 1 goal is all that they wrote about it. That's annoying. Yes, he performed very, very well through that midfield. And obviously kicked a goal, had some solid forward pressure. So, it's good to be recognised.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much, still in the shadows of Will at this moment, but even if he can be, like a 80%, you know what I mean? It's like a Josh and Nick Dacos sort of situation.
Yeah,
where,
it really is.
You're looking for more individual differences rather than like either skill, because they both seem talented enough to provide, different looks. So it'll be interesting to see how different he is from his brother, but also how much he can still provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And then jumping over to the Richmond players, Captain Toby Nankervis, I thought had a really, really solid outing in the ruck contest. He got 41 hitouts, 12 of them to advantage, and 15 touches, 8 contested possessions, 17 pressure acts, and 3 1%ers. 50 gamer Ben Miller, which is really crazy to think about considering he's been in the system about 7 years. He was very important in defense, especially in the fourth quarter. He finished with 10 disposals, 10 of them being effective, equating to 100% efficiency. You love to see it. 9 marks, 4 tackles, 10 pressure acts, 6 1%ers, and 6 spoils. And then just, number 1 draft pick watch, Sam Lawler, 24 touches, 17 of them effective, equating to 70.8% efficiency, 14 contested possessions, 3 inside 50s, a 2-1 scoreline, 4 goal assists, 10 score involvements, 4 tackles, 11 pressure acts, 6 ground ball gets, with 3 of them being inside 50.
Yeah, arguably Richmond's best player in terms of what I heard. Splitting hairs between a few, but a few players held their head up.
If you didn't already, honestly, if you didn't already have the Rising Star nomination from round 1, I think you probably would have gotten it this week, just based on stats alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, it's been, some pretty big matches. As I said, it's weird. Like, honestly, I don't know if this is controversial. I think he's actually had a bigger impact early in the season than Harley Reid did in his first few games.
That's not a hot take at all. I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because, again, I'm from West Australia, so everything that Harley Reid did in his first half a year was absolutely gold. He's sort of in his rebellion arc in the West, as I said. But, you know what they say, never live long enough being a hero and you see yourself become the villain. But,
yes.
Yeah, as I said, it's just been pretty instantaneous, and I think it's as well the chemistry. And as you mentioned, with their draft profile, and you did say, with all of them being from Victoria, some of them being in systems with each other, I actually think you can see some of that, because they are, they're still making skill errors.
I can't remember
they're not so much
specifically if Lawler, Armstrong, and Trainer all came from the Stingrays, or like down like those sorts of teams. I think they might have all been separate, or at least 2 of them.
Yeah,
but yeah, I know that like there is definitely there already is a lot of interconnectivity between all of our draftees. And yeah, seeing some of that already on
Yeah.
display is incredible.
Yeah, like I said, like for Richmond, I don't even think it's like, I mean, there's some times where they don't know necessarily the next move, but like a lot of their areas are just like from direct miss kicks. Like they know where they're going. They've just misexecuted.
Yes.
Which
Yeah,
I think
there
sign,
was a
'cause,
lot of that. I can confirm that.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like sometimes the worst is just that kick down the line on the wing. You know, there's no wing movement, so you just blaze it away to get the 10
Yeah,
meters.
and that's why I keep saying that we're probably missing Hugo Ralphsmith the most, because he's probably our number one wingman right now, and he's still out with injury.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, as I said, even in the Port Adelaide game where they got absolutely smashed, like, you could see the forward chain. Sorry, you could see the chains developing, and they just normally fell apart in the forward line. And they didn't even necessarily have the problem this week. They actually did all right in conversion wise. So.
No, I'm
out converted Brisbane's forward line technically.
Very true, actually, and I'm very very happy with the outcome. You know, 4 points would have been nice as per every week, but we're a developing side. We're rebuilding. This is the best we can hope for. It should just not get completely smashed.
Yeah, exactly. So, I guess talking about completely smashed, should we move on to the next game?
Yes, we shall. That was a great segue by us.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, young team looking good. Probably their first stinker of a performance for the year.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very dour night for the Blues. Blues? Sorry, Cabot's kicking in.
It's a
North
rhyme.
Melbourne, the Roos. As I mentioned, this game reminded me a lot of 2024 North, unfortunately. The Roos needed nearly 50 possessions to kick a goal, whilst the Swans shut down most avenues of North's ball carrying. I think the Swans needed 20-something in comparison. I didn't write that down. They weren't that, you know what I mean? But it was more just how much they shut down.
You can see it just by the math of the scoring shots anyway, really.
Yeah, the scoring shots or even the possession maps. Like, if you look at the quarter by quarters, if you go on the AFL app, you can just give a squiz through. Like, North had almost every possession in the back half of the ground and a concerning little amount in the forward half. And again, that point where I made where in a panic, sometimes young teams just kick far and long when they don't know that first option.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't know what to do. And that really felt like North were doing that. Because again, had more possessions than the Swans, but couldn't do anything about it. The Swans, I've talked about them trying to look a bit more conventional this year. Whether that's just to set Dean Cox up or whether that's his preferred style, I'm not sure. But it seems like their focus on one-on-ones has sort of opened the door to some players that weren't as involved last year. Amati, who again did kick a lot of goals last year, but was heavily skewed from his 10-goal performance. Has sort of been holding the fort well while Logan works his way in. Logan McDonald, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Comes back from injury in the twos. Apparently could have played this week, but the Swans were very happy to slow play him back into the side. Probably also don't want him travelling, 2 times with the Gabba round as well. They had 18 marks inside 50, and their use of Hamlin and McCartin playing in the opposite end, being very dour, whilst also relying on their gun and young halfbackers, being Blakey, Roberts, still amazingly to me, Sam Wicks, who again I just thought was going to fade out of the side in 2025. And of course, the emerging sensation. I won't talk about him individually because I know you're going to talk about him, but what a game he put on. Riley Bice.
So as I have learned just earlier today, his nickname around the club is Miami.
Miami Bice.
Yeah.
That's solid. Look, he was playing quite coast to coast, so I definitely deserve the coastal nickname. But yeah, as I mentioned, when you look at the marking profile for each team, Sydney had their game plan going. Their halfbackers getting plenty of marks, despite the lack on 50 inside 50 from the Roos. So what's going to be happening? And again, I paid more attention in the first half than the last half. I sort of lost interest in the game. But Sydney were able to push up a bit. They were beating their opponents one-on-one and often intercepting earlier. Those dump kicked by the Kangaroos. Whilst for the Roos themselves, excluding Stevens, who I thought tried hard against his old team, I thought the Roos were either marking deep in defence or needing forwards to come up as targets to kick to. Like, they were really struggling creatively to find those outside options. Again, marking stats weren't everything. I know I've been talking about it because a lot of teams have been doing it, but with this one, I think this was just more of an indication of a sort of executing game plan. Whereas you got this Swans team, they were marking, quite well to get a slow build up to lead to some quality inside 50s. Whereas the Roos just really didn't know what to do with it. And again, while the Swans did lose disposals, they had a very big time of possession win. And yeah, as I mentioned, it was just, it was very 2024 North Melbourne with this. Paul Curtis did a really good job in their forward line with the few times he had it, but it was just like, even the players that did really well in the midfield, like Cherry played an okay game, but again, a few of his disposals led to turnovers. Same with what was his name? The other midfielder, not Davies Uniacke.
That is a good question. I am blanking on names right now.
No, it was Davies Uniacke because Sheasel had the good game. Yeah, no.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Davies Uniacke was apparently tagged by Jordan. So his disposal weight went down. So, that's fair enough. But you know what I mean? It was just like pressure leading to bad decisions.
Yeah.
A lot of these young North Melbourne players are good at getting the ball, not as great at disposal or impactful disposal, I should say. So, as I said, again, leading possession, they probably should have got more inside 50s than they did. Just wasn't happening for them. Whereas, Sydney just looked systematically solid, Yeah. They had players that, probably didn't have the best games, in their lower end, but at the same time, it was just in enough areas. You have enough players playing well and you hardly notice that stuff. Whereas, as I said, with North's case, you're starting to try and use your best players to cover up holes, which takes away from their performances and it starts to cycle downhill.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we can see it, as I mentioned before, just in the scoring shots, that Sydney just had full control pretty much that entire game.
No, absolutely. And, as I said, the inside 50 count, I don't know if I actually mentioned it, but it was 37 inside 50s for North Melbourne, which was the lowest of the round. The only team to reach under 40, whereas Sydney was just a healthy 56. I didn't really look at this whole round, but I think that would be like 6 or something for the round in terms of team inside 50s.
That tracks
about that
pretty accurately, I would say.
7th if you want to be specific.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, it's a solid game from Sydney. Everyone pretty much expected them to win this one. I had a little bit more faith in North than I probably should have. But that's again developing side. It's definitely a lot more for them to learn out of this one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just one of the ones where, as I said, Sydney had a bit of a shaky record, but when you look at the people that they've played, and the score lines and the way they went about it, I feel like they've sort of week by week been working into their new system. And I think this was just a pretty big payoff in that regard.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. All right, let's jump over to the individuals. Will Hayward was immense up forward for the Swans. He kicked 4-1 from 15 disposals, 12 of them effective, equating to 80% efficiency, 4 contested possessions, 6 marks with 3 of them inside 50, 4 inside 50s overall, 9 score involvements and 8 pressure acts. Riley Bice, as we mentioned before, was best on ground, finishing with 26 touches, 22 of them effective, equating to 84.6% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 9 intercepts, 15 marks, 5 of them being intercept marks, 7 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, 6 pressure acts, 5 ground ball gets, and 433 metres gained. And then Joel Hamling was very effective at nullifying North's score opportunities, collecting 7 disposals, 7 of them being effective, equating to 100% efficiency, 3 marks, 10 pressure acts, 8 1%ers, and 8 spoils. For North Melbourne, Captain Jai Simpkin did his best to move the ball. He finished with 22 touches, 15 of them effective, equating to 68.2% efficiency, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 14 pressure acts, and 402 metres gained. And then veteran Luke Parker, I thought he pressured well for the most part. He kicked 2 goals from 27 touches, 21 of them effective, equating to 77.8% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 3 marks, 3 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 6 score involvements, 8 tackles, with 3 of them being inside 50, 19 pressure acts, and 6 ground ball gets.
Yeah, interesting. Like, you mentioned Sinkin, but I also remember him being a bit off with his pressure as well. You know what I mean? It was like, I think there was just a few players like that where I just felt, you know what I mean? Like, there were some senior players that felt a bit off with their, like, it wasn't so much direct, tackle pressure or anything, but like positioning.
Yeah, no, I did notice
which is,
that.
I think, which is like a skill that you can hardly ever like rate, but you can normally see it again in ball movements with other teams. You know what I mean? Where, it's not even so much, because some teams just go purely aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like, if they do that, they'll win and they'll get the ball and be able to move it forward. But at least in this game, North didn't have that profile, where if you're not doing that, sometimes you can concede the clearances, but still be set up outside of that. And I just don't really think they had the shape for it. And I think that's just one of the things that, I'm not going to, put it on him, but I think it's just like you wonder with Clarko, when he's actually going to ask a bit more from his midfield defensively. Like, because again, this has sort of been a minor problem for years. You know what I mean? Like, they've always been solid offensively. We know that they need to build up, but this isn't this isn't the first couple of years of them being together. You know what I mean? Like, this is a 3 or 4 year core group now.
Yeah, it is.
So
well, to be fair, they're still missing probably their other key piece, and that is Wardlaw, who is normally their big defensive midfield pressure. But you can't really, you're not meant to rely on one person to do all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, sometimes with North, I feel like they could just be asked the question a few times in certain areas. And I know you can't do it all at once. And there's still some small wins, especially in their offensive game coming up from North. But, you don't want to be, in your whatever it is, like your 6th or 7th year of this, and all of a sudden you're getting this forward game going, but you're still getting beaten due to lack of, defensive pressure. You know what I mean? Like, even you look at the Suns, and I've been critical about their forward conversion, over the years, but they've still had that defensive game. With solid outside running. I mentioned last year, like Closey and even Weller. Like sometimes he looks very vanilla, but he's a good hard runner.
Yeah.
And that allows, that backbone. Whereas, as I said, there's like offensive teams, like, are a dime a dozen, coming in. So I just feel if they continue to go this far, they might lag behind other teams, but maybe this is just, also it is one bad loss for the year. So we'll give them a pass.
And it's also still very early in the season.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's just like I don't know. I guess it just felt like the right time to talk about it because it's like that back of your mind thing whenever I talk about North.
Yeah, no, you're right. Jumping over to injuries, LDU Luke Davies-Uniacke, he did did have a left hip issue. I don't know if it's a serious issue or if it's just like a bit of soreness, a bit of strain on that side of the body, but hopefully he's all good. We will find out once injury lists and stuff are out either as of recording or tomorrow. And then over to the MRO, Nick Blakey, the Lizard, he was fined $1,875 for engaging in a melee. Jacob Constanti was fined $1,000 for engaging in a melee. I assume it was against each other. And then Brody Grundy was fined $3,750 for striking Tristan Sherry.
So at the end of the day, Blazy, which cup were we playing for in this match? Because there were actually quite a few. Just to finish it off.
True, there was.
Because it could have been
the Luke Parker Cup.
Could have been the Jacob Costanti Cup.
Could have been the Constanti
Luke
Cup.
Parker Cup. Dylan Stevens Cup.
The Stevens Cup.
One more, isn't there?
No,
that's it.
I think that's only 3.
But
I feel like it should have been the Luke Parker Cup, considering he was their captain.
Yeah, probably. I would say so, but I mean, shout out to Constanti. Like, he was playing with a bit of fire in his belly.
Absolutely.
I'm
glad that he's slotting in very nicely into this North Melbourne team, considering he just couldn't break into the Swans lineup.
Well, that's the sad. Like, picked up as a bit of a known. They probably were thinking 1 to 2 years of him, and they've obviously played the other debutant, Matt Whitlock, today on that day. But played him as a defender.
I forgot to mention that Whitlock debuted. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, he didn't have the biggest game, but playing in North's defense, just sort of held okay, sort of thing. It's a bit tough night for them, but subbed off about halfway through, I think. So, just sort of an okay debut. You can't judge it told really that early, but that's the benefit of having someone like a Costanti come on a bit late. Like you pick him up for cheap. He's already spent a few years on his body. I think he's a tallish player, isn't he?
I think he's like.
It's listed as small forward, but I thought he was like a 180.
I think he plays tall. I think he's like mid-sized.
Yeah, I call 185 tall. That really isn't actually.
I mean, it's taller than me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, I'm like 185. That's a height, but then it's like, oh, I'm just a short ass.
It's like
it's only 177. Okay.
Oh, so he's only like 5'8", 5'9". Like he's barely taller than me. Okay, fair enough.
A puny little human. No wonder he was let go. I'm joking. Sorry, if Jacob Constanti is listening to this podcast, obviously keen to listen about his performance week in, week out. Knows we like to talk about every club. So, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to joke about your height like that. I just thought you were a tall player. I don't really know what you look like. I'm sorry.
Speaking of tall players dominating a game, shall we jump over to the next one?
Yeah, and it was looking to be a mammoth win against an undersized defense in the first quarter. But the Eagles did manage 2 okay quarters of contest before the damn wall just broke again, leading to an 81-point win to the Giants. 2012, 132 to 7-9, 51 with Jesse Hogan is re-establishing himself in Coleman contention, making up for that 1 game lost time. As I mentioned before, when I was writing this, GWS actually had a mark inside 50 rate per inside 50 of around 14%. So that's 14% chance to mark it inside 50. Mm-hmm. That was around Carlton level. To put this game into perspective, they almost beat the quarter time record for marks inside 50. I think it's like 11 or 10 for a quarter. Mm-hmm. And they finished with 28-5 and now have a season mark inside 50 rate of 22.8. So they went from 18th at that point in time to 9th in 1 game. And I should mention, like, it wasn't a problem before with them. Like, they played a game in the wet. They had a game where they didn't have their forward line, basically. And the other game...
The game in the wind.
There was probably a reason for it. Yeah, the wind bowl. That's right. So, there was reasons for it. But, when they're firing, with no conditions, they could get the most out of their going. Despite all this, the first quarter was by far the worst for the Eagles, and like a few of the other games, at least possession-wise. Afterwards, after the bad first quarter, they did manage to get the game into 50-50 time of possession. But yeah, it was just quick and efficient ball movement, led by uncontested possession for the Giants, that just kept the scoreboard ticking. There's not really too much to say about this match. Despite being beaten in the middle, with the age profile of the Eagles center people, so with the age profile of Eagles center players, I would say the most disappointing about this game wasn't actually their midfield performance. I would say it was the lack of conversion in their forward line. Despite an actual okay amount of supply they had for this match, they had 55 inside 50 entries, which is 12 above their normal entries they had this year. They have a huge supply issues, but only managed 10 shots of each type, all really forced wide. Sam Taylor did have a big influence of this, but, I think the loss of Ryan just left the Eagles struggling, with a lot of struggling form forwards. Oscar Allen, Tyler Brockman, and Matt Owies. I will say Matt Owies did have the living daylights smacked out of him when he returned to Earth after a tunneling incident.
Oh, yeah.
So he gets sort of a pass. But, as I said, it was really the bulk of the dangerous forwards for the Eagles were really the youngsters, being the other Williams, that's not BJ, and Archer Reed, who, as I mentioned, looks better week in, week out. Again, the midfield pressure could have been a bit better. I think Graham led the charge with tackling 5, but yeah, the Eagles just play a bit too loose against their opponent and didn't have the tone set to compete against a team that could just work the ball outside as well as the Giants could.
Yeah.
And honestly, especially in that first quarter, I just saw a lot of situations where the Eagles would lose the center clearance, but the only one that was pressuring the clearance winner was actually the ruckman in BJ Williams. And I know he only laid 4 tackles, but in terms of pressure on the ball user, it's really disappointing that he was the only player stepping up when, they were being challenged very early.
Yeah, that's pretty much right. The West Coast didn't really show all them. I was very surprised that there was such little tackles in their core midfield. For the Eagles.
Baker and Graham did put the pressure on later, but early on, you know what I mean? It just took a while for them to get going. And, I know, again, it's very hard when you've got such a young group, but you know what I mean? It's just we've seen some teams actually make an effort stopping chains by just even putting in very generic tackle pressure. But yeah, it's just concerning that it doesn't seem like any game the Eagles players play, they never get that game part of their game going. It's just not a very good pressure team, and even with the, I think, deliberate inclusion of Baker and Graham to try and shift that profile, you can't just rely on them. It's got to come in other areas as well.
Correct.
And you know what I mean? It's, it's other veterans like Kelly and, well, not so much tackling from Kelly, but at least changing the way that outside shape looks if you're not winning those contests. Same with even Harley Reid, you know what I mean? He's definitely a bit of a one-way player so far. Again, I'm not as harsh on him as other people are. I don't really see the point in playing him in defense. And I think I might have did I mention this last week? It was just a bit confusing to me.
I can't remember if you mentioned it last week.
Yeah, so he started off half back again this week before switching into the midfield. But you know what I mean? It's especially in a game against GWS where they're absolutely smashing him with forward movement. You know what I mean? They're not generating from the back half. So,
no.
You know what I mean? It's the inclusion of Harley Reid doesn't really change that. And the commentators are it's what do you decide? Do you add midfield generation to try and produce goals, or do you try and save goals by having him in defense? But he's really defensively unaccountable so far in this season. Players like Gibney were a lot more accountable. Again, was a bit half and half, but as I said, he still puts in efforts most weeks. Ryan Marich, was continually trying. Sandy Brock, first game, it got beaten, but you know what I mean? These were players that, seemed a lot tighter on their opponents, but just got beaten. Whereas, as I said, it's a very weird one with Harley. He wasn't the only one. Brady Hoff sort of didn't play his best game either as a small forward. Tom Cole, probably his worst game for this year, probably worse since probably a year, I would say. But it's just interesting.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
isn't.
I also haven't talked much about the Giants,
I
but
don't think you really need
yeah.
to be honest. Like everyone kind of performed their roles to great effect, especially Sam Taylor, Kieran Briggs, who I mentioned before, or I'll mention in a minute.
Yeah.
Jesse Hogan, obviously. Like there isn't really too
Lucky
much to really cover.
Ash. Yeah. Harry Himmelberg, I thought was absolutely fantastic. Um, Playing like a very aggressive defender. You know what I mean? Like they were able to just generate so much from halfback guy. I did make the joke earlier in the week that Adelaide were sort of the halfback team the media pretends the Giants are. But this is actually a game where they got a lot of that going. Um, as I mentioned, that's not really that's more a flight on the media. Like the Giants are a grinding team, but eventually when they break through, they tend to do very well. Whereas, as I said, this game they didn't have to do much grinding.
No, they just had full control from the get go. Speaking of full control, Jesse Hogan had full control.
Mm,
He was absolutely
absolutely.
immense up forward. He kicked 9 goals straight from 12 touches, 11 of them effective, equating to 91.7% efficiency. 7 contested possessions, 10 marks, 5 of them being contested marks, all of them being inside 50, and 11 score involvements. Youngster Darcy Jones was prolific with ball usage. He kicked 2 goals from 24 disposals, 18 of them effective, equating to 75% efficiency. 6 contested possessions, 6 marks, with 2 of them being inside 50, 6 inside 50s, 13 score involvements, 7 tackles, 23 pressure acts, 494 meters gained. Kieran Briggs absolutely dominated the ruck, but as we've talked about in the past, West Coast don't really have the best sort of ruckman. They still have a developing ruckman that they kind of have to use because they don't have anyone else. So Kieran Briggs pretty much had full control. He got 42 hitouts with 16 to advantage and 15 disposals, 6 contested possessions, 4 marks, 2 clearances, 8 score involvements, 13 pressure acts, and 2 1%ers. Over to the Eagles, Liam Baker was probably best to field. He finished with 24 touches, 13 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 10 inside 50s, 5 clearances, a behind, 5 score involvements, 4 tackles, 29 pressure acts, 11 ground ball gets, and 566 meters gained. And as you mentioned, there was a debutant. In fact, there were a couple. So shout outs to Sandy Brock, 12 touches, 9 intercepts, 4 1%ers, 4 spoils. Hamish Davis, who had 5 touches and 2 score involvements, not related, by the way. If anyone was curious, that may already know my last name. It's not related. And Tom Gross, 17 touches, 7 contested possessions, 6 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 7 score involvements, and 4 ground ball gets.
Yeah, all of which had their little impact. Unfortunately, Sandy Brock was put on Jesse Hogan in his first game of AFL, so tough first assignment. It's fair to say.
Yeah, it's pretty
Probably
much like
one of the
throwing him to the wolves.
toughest in recent time. Yeah, no McGovern, no Luke Edwards. So Ruben Gibney doesn't quite have that height profile to suit Hogan. Choosing to play on the athletic Cadman, which he did play fairly well against. Sort of Cadman sort of were just floating around with Callum Brown, sort of playing second fiddle, I would say, to be honest. Like, you know what I mean? They weren't really getting the ball, but they weren't really needing to because, they just need a bit of space for Hogan to let him flourish. So, yeah, as I said, tough break, but at least Brock put in some offensive efforts as well. He probably had that. You would imagine the coach would have given him some license, because you don't want him to be too down on his debut game. So, it's a tough first assignment, but he definitely didn't do badly. It's just he wasn't put in a position to win, and it's good that he made the most out of the opportunity. Hopefully, he gets a few more in the future when he's a bit more fleshed out.
Fingers crossed. I mean, long season, probably a long career considering he's so young, as well as all the other debutants that they had, of course. So hopefully, some sort of positive signs in the future for them. In terms of injuries, Stephen Cornelio was a late change with a glute tightness, glute issue. I don't know. But he was taken out, and Callum Brown was brought in, as you had just mentioned. He kind of just, got to run around a bit with Aaron Cadman, had a bit of fun.
Yeah. It's honestly, I don't want to be too skeptical. This could have been arresting as well, because you know what I mean. Like, the Eagles lineup gets announced. You know that they're very undersized. it's a chance to say, okay, Cullen Brown, we want you to do these certain roles. Give you another shot, and we'll just use this as a chance to rest him. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him next week. But, as I said, yeah, you don't want to assume like a team just going to assume that they're going to like rock in and just romp him. But, yeah,
well,
it's probably a fair enough risk that you probably take as a coach.
It was probably inevitable that the Giants were going to run rampant in this game, let's be real.
Yeah. Poor Eagles.
However, the opposite of running rampant happened in our next game as we jump over to the Adelaide Oval.
Yeah. So, again, we talked about the dismal fourth quarter effort against Essendon by Port Adelaide, and they just made life hard for themselves with an absolutely atrocious first quarter against the Saints. Both teams, before this match, they're not fielding their best 22. There was a lot of key outs in this match, but it just seemed like the Saints were more creative in their avenues to goal. They certainly were a lot more clean early, and they ended up winning the match. Port Adelaide 72, 10-12 to St Kilda 13-11-89. And yeah, as I mentioned, in the first quarter, it was all way too easy with ball in hand. They even probably missed some easier chances, but evening up the ledger was one lively Jack Higgins. He made up for it by slotting some tougher goals to sink Port. I mentioned that they missed Steele, but the tone of the night was sort of set with the Saints dominating from stoppage early. They didn't let that stop them. Overall, they got 8-5 from stoppages themselves, 3-2 of those being centre bounce, as Port yet again only scored from a singular goal from stoppage, as lagging behind the Eagles as the worst stoppage team in terms of goal scores from this year. And in fact, the Power scored 0-5 from general play, I should say, meaning all their goals came from either free kicks or marks inside 50 this match. I think they only had 3 or 4 goal kickers. I think it was Georgiadis, Jason Horse-Francis, Sam Powell-Pepper, and Ollie Lord. So pretty much like Carlton, all semblance of a ground ball game were missing from their performance this week and arguably the other 2 weeks as well. Again, despite dropping the ball early, I think Port had their defense to thank a bit from keeping them in this contest, with Aaliyah and Miles Bergman intercepting a bulk of the play. Once Port stopped being a bit porous defensively. One major issue is they sort of have 4 halfbackers playing in defense and 2 athletic tall, which is a lineup that gets very exposed by small ball, which the majority of the teams they've faced early this year have been small match lineups. So Essendon, pretty much all smalls. St Kilda, pretty much all smalls. Richmond also fits that profile, and whoever they got spanked. Oh, Collingwood.
Yes.
Probably more of a mixed bag, but still reliant on their small forwards. So, yeah, and they'll match up again against the Hawks, which, again, probably one of the best small forward producing teams of the modern, not modern game, but of this year. So, Saints dominated ground ball. Port put pressure on quite well against it. And a few times, actually, they were sort of a bit unlucky because there were a few shanks and dribbles on the ground that just sort of deflected the Saints' way. They sort of had a bit of luck go their way, the Saints, but they were also set up to capitalize from their luck. Because, apart from the first, like, Port dominated time of possession. I don't think the clearances they sort of won after this, but, the more general around the ground stuff Port ended up being a lot better at. It's just that they couldn't convert from a lot of it unless it was that set shot.
Yeah.
And one of the players to do that, Jason Horne-Francis, was by far and away the best player on the ground. They would have not come close without his input. And he was the most dangerous clearance winner. And when he was resting forward, he was able to take some important marks and goals. If he learned to time his leaps a bit better, there was a few times he went a bit early, gave away a few free kicks. It would probably be one of the best marking forward mid swings in the comp. He's got an absolutely fantastic leap, and he converts pretty well off them. But yeah, as I said, they just don't really have much distributors. You know what I mean? It's almost concerning that Juan Francis gets a lot of his opportunities because he's like also one of the best ball inside 50 doers. He's one of the best inside 50 distributors for Port. So, it's a bit of one hand takes away from the other. Zach Butters is normally a bit better at it, but he was, just reasonable on his first game back. Connor Rosie really struggled, I'm going to be honest. He's continuing his very mid start to the season. And yeah, a lot of the other Port forward line, they're very low meters gained. You know what I mean? Like, you got Jordan Sweet, 22 meters gained. Ollie Wine, 71 meters gained. I think even... I can't see him. Willem Drew, 316, so it's not as bad, but you know what I mean? It's just, yeah, they don't tend to move the ball forward. A few of the younger players dropped off, especially on the outside. It was the worst game I see Jace Bergwijn play for a while. Christian Moraes sort of played to his games played profile. And yeah, as I said, it just wasn't consistent enough. It was really a few players trying to bail them out of this match. It really wasn't that... even though it was a comeback, it wasn't like, it wasn't restoring faith in the way Port play.
Yeah.
It was just, sort of bailed out by higher end talent. And, they just didn't seem complete. I was the opposite sort of true for St Kilda. And I mentioned this on, the Discord, a Discord thing that has like a Port Adelaide subreddit. Or sub whatever. I mentioned that, Port Adelaide, they've been able to get away with their game plan for so long that we're starting to see it come back to them now. Whereas, Port really didn't know what to do when they're struggling. They panic for options. Their forward line link-up's pretty atrocious. Whereas the Saints, and I know, their first game was absolutely atrocious, but... for all of last year, you can say it was a wasted season or whatever, but they really have found avenues for scoring. And I know it dried up a bit, but you know what I mean? Even their limited opportunities converted into some really nice and easy goals that just kept them ticking along. And, they don't have that really key forward, so they're making the most out of it. And it's that creativity from... adversity, whereas Port just don't have that. Their creativity from adversity comes from a few key players, and that's very concerning to me. Is very much this is a team that at best is very much struggling to maybe make the 8 sort of profile. They've had a few stats go their way, but you know what I mean? It's it's still possible that they can turn around from this. And, as a tipping suggester, I wouldn't back them in until they do. But,
yeah,
you know what I mean? It's just, it feels different from other years where they've sort of bashed their heads against the wall to break through, It just doesn't seem like it's going to happen unless something changes, which, doesn't tend to happen with the way that the Port set up.
Well, I mean, it's like you look at some of the other sort of more middling teams, and it's part of it is structural issues, but part of it is also to some degree a lack of effort from some players. It feels like.
I don't really think it's an effort thing. I just think it's it's an effort for structure. I think more than literally I just want to go out, because I think I've never once watched a Port game and thought, yeah, they're really going half-heartedly. Even this game, they were pretty beaten in the first, but they still worked their way back in it. But you know what I mean? Often they'll commit too hard to the wrong choices, or push up a bit too early, leave themselves exposed, or sometimes be a bit too aggressive with their handballing. You know what I mean? Port will handball across the middle of the ground, between an opposition player, but then choose the most generic dump, you know what I mean? Inside 50. So even when they pull it off, it's not like they're getting much reward for it unless they can find that one-on-one contest. So they're playing with a lot of risk, but not having a reward at the end of it to be able to get to, or at least not consistently.
Yeah, that's pretty true. And like credit to St Kilda for being able to put on that pressure and show some creativity still, like away from home, when again they still don't have Max King up there. They still don't have their number one key forward. And they're making use of players like Mason Wood, Caminiti, Cooper Sharman when he occasionally drifts forward. There's a bunch of and obviously the small forwards as well, especially Jack Higgins, who I'll talk about in a minute.
Even the young players like Lance Collard, a bit hit or miss, but I think shape-wise he was pretty solid. And Max Sol, just providing some different options here and there.
And Toby Travaglia, brief shout out to him. He kicked his first career goal as well. So there's a lot to currently look forward to in this St Kilda lineup, even without Max King.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like, going back to the age profile, like, these are some young players that are keeping shape. Whereas, you know what I mean? Like, Jace Burgoyne, because he wasn't producing offensively, he was a bit of a moot sort of player. Josh Sin, I think, was another one that sort of was a bit mediocre defensively, and because offensively they couldn't get their game going, you just looked awful. As a few other players. Unfortunately, Logan Evans sort of struggled a bit. Willie Rioli was sort of an interesting one because his distribution in the forward half was absolutely fantastic, but we just sort of haven't figured out how to get him involved. He's like he plays like stringer on his off days. You know what I mean? Like, when he gets the ball, he can do absolutely great things with it, but he just only has 9 possessions a game and not enough goals. So,
it's
It's
about finding just ways to get them more involved. Like, do you play him as a more floating forward, or do you play him like as a deeper forward and just have that hard pressure up forward? What sort of position do you put him in?
And it's like, you watch Willie play, and I don't ever really think like he's not running hard enough or anything, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just not conducive to set up to his strength. Like, honestly, we're setting up the strength for like Georgiadis. He's like on an island in the forward line. Like, sure, Ollie Lord played a lot better. Shout outs to him. But you know what I mean? Like, that was a very unexpected 3-goal-1 performance. But you know what I mean? It's like, Sampao Pepper doesn't really do enough. And it's like, they've got all of these players that are like okay in the forward line. Like Sampao Pepper, Darcy Byrne-Jones, even, or Willie Rioli even. You got to put him in the category where, Joe Richards as well. I thought he actually looked better when he was removed from the forward half. So, they just really got to look at their look because, St Kilda are actually playing legitimate forwards. And surprise, surprise, they're getting legitimate goals. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes it's not that hard. Like, you just got to put time and effort into legitimate positional players instead of always going to that stopgap. And you know what? It's sort of that awkward position now where Port Adelaide almost look like an Essendon light. You know what I mean? Like, they've just spent so much time trying to plug holes, and fair enough, they were very close to that. But I think they've almost got a reset now, and they've got enough young players to go through. They're going to miss their first round draft pick, but that doesn't concern me too much. I'd just rather see them, and they're doing it to be fair, but like, if they're gonna struggle this year, I just want them to play players in positions where I could see like a 3 or 4 year, set Carr up a bit. Whatever happens to Hinkley happens. I still hope the best for him, and some of the conversation around him I think's frankly been a bit disgusting. But you know what I mean? It's like, if it's not going to happen this year, at least set yourself forward, like St Kilda have seemingly done in their hopefully what's just a one-off year for them last year. But honestly, they even look more threatening than they did in 2023 when they made finals.
I agree, because I honestly feel like in 2023 they only like barely scraped by. Like they were good, but they weren't like at the great echelon of like the top 8 teams that
Yeah.
probably should have been there. But like
And they
like
were
this season
very
so
reliant
far,
on Max King.
yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
And now they have a lot more
Like,
flexibility, a lot more creativity, a lot more
yeah.
diversity in their forward structure, their midfield structure as well. Like the inclusion of Jack McRae, as we've talked about the past couple of weeks, and I will talk
Of
about
course,
again
yeah.
today, has been nothing short of incredible for them because it gave Jack Steele and Jack Sinclair like less, not, I wouldn't say like less importance, but like it took a little bit of weight off of their shoulders in terms of like the stuff
Well,
that they
Sinclair
had to
didn't
do.
even get involved until the second half. You know what I mean? Um, it's sort of a tiny bit on the same, but it was just like, yeah, as I said, it just added a bit more depth. And this is without, I say Steele Green, Jack Steele.
Yes, yeah, they didn't have Steele again. They still don't have King. Like they're missing still, and they're still missing 1 or 2 defenders right now, aren't they?
They're missing. Well, it's not actually too bad at the moment. What's his name? Sort of the makeshift defender. He used to play for the Bulldogs. Zane Cordy.
Yes.
But yeah, and also the debutant. Yet to debutant. Taru.
Yes, that's right.
That's what they're missing as well.
Yeah, so like, and granted, we don't know much about Taru, but like Zane Cordy's been like solid in defense for a while now. Granted, he's out with concussion or some kind of injury.
Good enough, yeah, exactly.
So like,
yeah,
once he comes back, they can sort of fix their backline again and try and make it more solid because again, the loss of Battle didn't help them really at all in terms of that.
Yeah.
But their forward structure, their midfield structure, looking pretty solid. It's just once they can figure out a settled backline
too as well.
Yeah, that's true. Like as I mentioned, Wanganeen Miller, who I thought was really important from halfback to wing. But like once they figure out that solid backline structure again, I'm pretty sure this is going to be a very solid team going forward.
Yeah, exactly. Like the biggest weakness is just conceding those marks in defensive 50. But again, Porter tend to be fairly well at that. And when you look at Mitch Georgiadis, he takes a lot of wide marks.
Yes,
teams are letting him take those. Like he scored 3-2, but a couple of those were out in the full, and most were from tough positions. There was a couple of nice, I call it the Josh Tracy lead because it's so good at it these days. Where that outside lead heading towards 50, you mark it from about 40 out. Just in those lapses of zone defense where they leave that open. That's where he gets a lot of his straight in front goals. But apart from that, he's just having to kick from very tough positions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, let's jump over to the individuals because we've kind of talked enough about the entire game structure. Jack Higgins, as I did mention before, he was leading goal kicker for the Saints. He kicked 3 goals from 10 disposals, 8 of them effective, equating to 80% efficiency. 4 contested possessions, 6 score involvements, 5 tackles, 11 pressure acts, 3 ground ball gets. Recruit Jack McRae was immense yet again. Like he's easily in the lead for their best and fairest right now. 28 touches, 15 contested possessions, 5 inside 50s, 9 clearances. Behind, 9 score involvements, 4 tackles, 19 pressure acts, 11 ground ball gets, 467 meters gained. Now, Isaiah Wanganeen Miller, as I had just mentioned, he was very important on the wing and through halfback as well. He kicked 1-1 from 25 disposals, 18 of them effective, equating to 72% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 10 intercepts, 3 inside 50s, 5 score involvements, 14 pressure acts, 3 1%ers, 5 ground ball gets, and 3 spoils. For Port Adelaide, I thought Jordan Sweet was very important in the ruck. He got 39 hitouts with 8 of them to advantage and 10 touches, 13 contested possessions, 5 clearances, 4 score involvements, 4 tackles, 14 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, and 3 spoils. And then Miles Bergman, as you mentioned right at the start of this game, he performed really well. Finished with 26 touches, 21 of them effective, equating to 80.8% efficiency, 7 contested possessions, 12 intercepts, 9 marks, 5 inside 50s, 4 score involvements, 4 tackles, 14 pressure acts, 3 1%ers, 4 ground ball gets, and 677 meters gained.
Yeah, and as I said, it's just, it's just, I don't want to talk about too much because I think we've pretty comprehensively covered this game, but yeah, it's really up to Miles Bergman to do much of the defending for the Smalls, but you know what I mean? It's like with, what's his name? I was about to call him Zach Burke-Thatcher. You know who I'm talking about. ZBT,
Yes.
the acronym, out. He's just sort of forced to play on taller players. So again, ideally, I think once we get all our players back, he plays on the small defenders that we've been leaking so much.
BZT.
But yeah, unfortunately, ZBT,
BZT. Brandon
Zerk
Thatcher.
Brendan Thatcher. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so
no.
yeah, as I said, so that's what it is. And also Ryan Burton, I should say. But
yeah, you are
again,
missing like a couple of key players down there.
Yeah, it's like not an excuse, but as I said, that's where some of our issues are compiling pretty massively.
All right, let's jump over to the last game of the round over in the West. Apparently, it was quite warm for this one. Freo and the Western Bulldogs.
Yeah. Again, I wouldn't know because the wind was blowing all the heat away, but I think it was like 30, 31 degrees. Again, it's been a very warm autumn for Perth, as it tends to be before the rain starts.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it wasn't without drama, but the Dockers did finally manage a tough win against the Bulldogs. The Doggies had their own personnel issues. We've talked about this before. But Freo were absolutely stuffed in the last quarter after a free-flowing affair turned dour due to Freo only having 2 people on the bench with limited but not 0 rotations, as we found out in the last quarter, and looked absolutely gassed. What I'm referring to is on the AFL app, which was apparently a champion data error. It showed that Freo only had 3 rotations in the last quarter, or 4, I think it was actually, when really they had 10, which confused a lot of people. Apparently Fox Footy got the call, but a lot of the radio calls and 7 commentary were a bit confused about that. But they were still playing very, very tired and very, very undermanned. But they managed to be quite mature, as the Doggies, whilst getting a lot of attacking done in the last quarter, weren't putting it on the scoreboard, so Freo decided to hold out time until they could get one last bit of attack, as Murphy Reid sealed it for the Dockers. The final score was 15-7, 97 Dockers to 12-9, 81 Blazy. And while Murphy Reid's sort of been hailed as a hero, honestly, do you reckon he did the wrong thing by scoring the goal? Because if he didn't, the Dockers would have won a game by a margin under 10 or 10 and under. By putting it on 16, it doesn't go onto the stat. So theoretically, they've still got the 1-6 record. So take of that what you will. I am being a bit tongue-in-cheeky here, though.
You are. It was, the reality of it is they got the 4 points, and that's currently, for them, all that really matters.
Yeah, well, the fact is they held on in the last quarter, which is really what they're looking for. Again, sometimes I think people get too clinging on stats, because as I mentioned, like, this was a close game, but it won't technically be recorded as well.
They might have been gassed massively in that last quarter, but the fact of the matter is their endurance held out. Like, that's something that you train hard for in the preseason. And the fact that it was actually put on display with how little rotations they had. Like, because I was looking at time on ground stats when I was looking for individual players, and like there were like 6 or 7 players with over 90% time on ground, which is something you don't ever really see.
Yeah, exactly. Because although a lot of these happened later in the half, they weren't really. They were making a lot of quick changes because, as I mentioned, with the warm conditions, they probably were planning not to get gas later on. Is just, well, you know what they say about best laid plans. But I will say, I mentioned this later, but I'll bring it forward. I also thought some of the efforts in the last half by their forwards, who admittedly didn't have as much to do in the game. They did a lot more defending, had very limited inside 50s. But they did a lot of running to help their gas defenders. And I want to highlight players like Michael Frederick, Shai Bolton. Again, I was about to call him Ethan Reedy. Whichever Reed is Murphy Reid.
Murphy Reid. We're talking about
too many Reeds in the AFL.
There are like
Isaiah Dudley to put in hard yards to try and give easy marks to Freo. Freo's halfbackers, to try and get that bit of hold-up play. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes when a team holds it up, their forward line just acts stagnant and looks for the long down the line kick. Whereas Freo were definitely wanting to take as many chip marks as they can. Again, you could say, oh, they were a bit too tepid, but the Bulldogs had only scored one goal, and it was quite a creative goal by Sam Darcy, which, you just don't expect given it. So I think they actually made a lot of right decisions in that last quarter. I think in that context, it was almost the perfect way to close out that game.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as I said, overall, Freo were spending 60% time in their defensive half in that entire match, with having to defend 70% in the last quarter. So the Dogs were absolutely getting it forward. It's just Freo really did solid to only keep 2 players for the Dogs as multiple goal kickers, even if one of them was the 5-0 Sam Darcy, who was cooking up a storm. And I think, two-way running sort of made this team, it looked like a seemingly undefensive contest, but it wasn't quite as bad as it was in paper. It's just like, as we know with the Doggies, they like to put a lot of their pressure on in the forward half. They like to put the defensive efforts up the ground, try and get the ball in there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Dockers were more aggressive intercepting, trying to cut off would-be attacking chains. And once they did, they worked the ball forward to some pretty efficient forward line attack, mainly headed by players like Tracy. But I thought the midfield battle as well from this game was very interesting, because you got Libba and Richards playing really good inside midfield games, but they were going head-to-head with Luke Jackson, Caleb Sarong, and Andy Brayshaw in a battle of who could set up their team the most. But it was sort of the Fremantle's ability to link up with their forward line better. Again, helped by Tracy being one of the best leading forwards to kick to in the game at the moment, really. That helped them, close out that win and, get that win that they've been searching for.
Yeah.
Whereas the Dogs, they sort of look okay on, form, considering despite the 50-50 split on wins.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I mean, this wasn't the worst game from the Bulldogs by any stretch. Like, especially in that fourth, they still put on a lot of pressure. They just struggled to convert up forward in that last quarter. Fremantle defense was immense in that fourth quarter, and it's why the outcome was the way that it was. The fact that Fremantle were even able to get away, like getting that ball out of that defensive 50 so often, and still managed to push it up forward and convert, even when they had very little numbers to work with, is immense. Like, it's crazy to see.
Yeah, because the inside 50s, I should say, it was 63-44. While 44 isn't that crash hot, considering that they scored 96 or something from them. It was very solid. So, 97, I should say. But yeah, so for the Dogs, it was very much like last year for them. They didn't really have too much back half movement, but Fremantle are better at shutting that down. And they've been solid all year considering they're out, so I'm going to give them a pass for that. But
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's just lack of personnel away from home against a team that's, I thought, had just done enough and sort of took another step this week. So, it seems Fremantle's leveling out, I would say, in a good way.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with
Back to where we thought they would be.
Yeah, pretty much. This is essentially where we kind of expected them to be. I wouldn't necessarily say at this part of the season. We probably expected them to be a little bit higher this part of the season, but they kind of, again, they've leveled out. And now hopefully, provided they get over their major injury issues, which I will talk about momentarily, they should be tracking upwards for the most part this season.
Yeah, and again, their only 2 losses were Geelong and Sydney. So
yeah, which are
and one of them
strong teams. So
yeah.
Jumping over to the individuals, as you mentioned before, Michael Frederick, he looked very good this week. He was very consistent up forward as well. He kicked 3-1 from 13 disposals, 5 marks, 4 inside 50s, 6 score involvement, 7 pressure acts, 2 1%ers. Andy Brayshaw was immense with the midfield pressure. He kicked a goal from 29 touches, 21 of them effective, equating to 72.4% efficiency, 13 contested possessions, 4 clearances, 4 goal assists, 9 score involvements, 9 tackles, 30 pressure acts, 8 ground ball gets, and 360 meters gained. Josh Draper was fed to the Wolves after being assigned to Sam Darcy when the Pearce matchup failed because he went out. No, he didn't go out. He got shuffled around. But he ended up finishing really well to end out the game. 8 disposals with 7 of them effective, equating to 87.5% efficiency. 3 contested possessions, 3 intercepts, 8 pressure acts, 12 1%ers, and 12 spoils. And, didn't get beaten all that badly. Granted, 2 goals kicked against him. Don't really want to see it. But in terms of, what they had to do, especially in that second half, very impressive.
I'll just chip in here because I actually wrote a tiny bit because it needed a bit of context because, as I said, Pearce had the matchup on Darcy earlier, and he was actually convincingly beaten by him. He just looked like a pretty bad matchup all night. And Draper, again, was just sort of doing okay, went on him. And, the athleticism, probably a bit wary considering they know the talent of Darcy. But sometimes you do actually got to go athleticism because, as I said, he just forced Darcy to make his efforts harder. And imagine, those 2 goals, one of them was a pretty fluky running goal, and the other was a goal from centre clearance. Very hard to defend when you just, lose a centre bounce instantly, high up lead from about 45 metres out. They weren't actually defensive losses, I would call. That's just, offensive football. Sometimes you get your forwards in good positions because it's a game of football.
Yeah, exactly right. Jumping over to the Dogs, James Harbs, I thought he had a really solid outing this week. He kicked a goal from 24 disposals, 16 of them effective, equating to 66.7% efficiency. 10 contested possessions, 4 marks, 4 inside 50s, 4 score involvements, 7 tackles, 17 pressure acts, 7 ground ball gets. And then, as we've already talked about, big man Sam Darcy, he monster in front of the goals, as he normally is. He kicked 5 goals from 21 touches, 15 of them effective, equating to 71.4% efficiency, 11 contested possessions, 11 marks, with 4 of them contested and 6 of them being inside 50, 3 clearances, 9 score involvements, 9 pressure acts, and 4 ground ball gets.
Yep, as I said, absolute monster. It's going to be, as I said, a lot's been said about the absence of Jamari Ugle-Hagan. But honestly, I think Darcy is the forward you can actually build around a lot more. He's just a lot more of a consistent presence in terms of a key forward. So, and I'm not using that to slam Ugle-Hagan or whatever.
No, of course not.
It's just one of those things where in a unideal situation, they've done really well at shifting. They haven't ever put Darcy in a position where he's not supported. You still have Norton. He hasn't had the best games, but you know what I mean? They haven't, shifted him back or, done weird things with him while he's not been in there. James O'Donnell switches around to try and help out. Sometimes played as a backman, but the last few weeks played as a forward in the absence of Vandermeer. So, Vandermeer? Yeah, Vandermeer.
I mean, speaking of he did play this week, but he did also go pretty much straight out for the most part. I don't actually, it might have been second half he went out. I can't remember. Anyway, on to the injuries, since we may as well talk about them now. Luke Jackson had a hamstring issue. I don't know how long that'll be for. Hopefully not very long because he's very important to that Freo lineup. Nathan O'Driscoll did an ankle. Again, I don't know how bad. Hopefully it's not too bad. Corey Wagner had calf awareness, so I mean he felt like a strain in the calf and didn't want to risk it. So Medicos pulled the plug on him. So he should be fine for next week against Richmond, which we'll talk about momentarily anyway. And then Latham Vandermeer for the Dogs. Out with knee soreness sometime during the game. Again, he should be fine for next week. It's just probably a little tender. Didn't want to put too much work on it. That sort of stuff.
Yeah, I will say it was very unlucky by Freo because, again, Wagner for Warner is pretty much one of your more straightforward substitutions. You know what I mean? Very similar players. So, again, you get a bit of calf awareness, you just make the call. It's pretty forward. But as soon as you make that, you know what I mean? It's
there's always another one that goes down.
Instantaneously later, Nathan O'Driscoll, and then later on Luke Jackson. Driscoll did run out a bit, but they decided it wasn't worth it. They didn't want to aggravate it, so again, touch and go, but he's got prospects for next week. But I couldn't imagine Luke Jackson coming back. They sort of waited to put ice on him. It's a hamstring, but they actually put it more in the quad region, so it could actually be a bit, something not quite straightforward as a hamstring, but it still looks like some sort of soft tissue couple of week
key
deal.
knee area, which you don't want, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of man to lift up, especially when he's playing so well, but you know what I mean? So hopefully Darcy did. Sorry, Sam Darcy. What's his name?
Which one are you thinking about?
The one that plays for Freo, the ruckman. Is it Sam?
No.
Sam
Sean Darcy?
Sean Darcy, thank you.
I knew it was an S.
Names have escaped me. Yeah, he's working back, so I don't think he's actually injured anymore. So he's working back in, but they're gonna hope he comes back for next week instead of just having a Voss ruckman, because he was serviceable, but
he's not the number one ruckman currently.
No, he's not even the number 2 ruckman, but he was sort of forced to take that role. Still got 6 hit-outs, so shout out to him, I guess.
That will do it for our breakdown of round 4. Now to our previews of round 5, which is Gather Round, the festival of footy over in Adelaide. Starting with Thursday night, Adelaide and Geelong at the Adelaide Oval.
What a game to start with.
Absolute banger of a game to start with.
One of the best movers from back half to forward line to one of the distributors in their own forward line. Again, this matchup is very eerily similar to the Gold Coast one that's just been played.
Mm-hmm.
Huge credit for Gold Coast to being comparable to Geelong, by the way. I didn't think I'll be saying that early on.
Could we call it the Gary Ablett effect?
Maybe. But yeah, this one's honestly, it's going to be tough because it would sting for Adelaide to lose 2 in a row, and I definitely think Geelong have the capabilities, especially with their defense looking a bit, I always say it's set 1-on-1, but having a bit more flexibility, because last year I would just say, you know what, Adelaide's free key forward, I don't know if Geelong can defend that. Whereas this year, as I said, with O'Sullivan looking pretty solid, depends how well Sander Koenig goes, looking feasible. It's just, again, I think Adelaide's attack can get worked out. I think we saw that enough with Gold Coast, and that's why I'm going to lead to the Cats.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cats just will find weaknesses within your forward line. But again, if the Crows can get some, Geelong aren't a heavy possession team, they will allow you to get possessions. So, again, I wouldn't also be surprised if Adelaide did kick their mark when they got time of possession. But I'm going to say Geelong in a shootout, but that might be a bit, I feel like I'm hopping between tips, you know what I mean? I tip Adelaide over to get over Gold Coast, and then they didn't do that for me, so I'm off them. So, I'm dizzy.
I'm very much on the fence on this one currently. Honestly, this could be like an ins and outs sort of thing, but both lists are very healthy. So it's only going to be like very minuscule sort of changes, if any at all. So yeah, honestly, I got no idea. I kind of want to put more faith in Adelaide just because I don't like Geelong. But genuinely, this is a very 50-50.
Yeah, last time they played in Adelaide was early last season when Adelaide were off form, and it was still 77-96. So that, I don't know if that means too much. The other one was at Goomba in 2023. That was when Adelaide couldn't win away from home, 98-72. So last couple of games, Geelong's won. Sort of 50-50. Otherwise, in recent matchups, I've been trying to do the recent matchups more, just to mention other stuff than vague whims and all of that.
Yeah, as long as you don't entirely look like the pandemic era sort of matchups, like 2023, 2024 are usually good indicators as to where a team is, for the most part, sitting in like against each other.
So yeah, but as I said, yeah, as I said, I think it's not much to it. Go with your gut. But I still think Geelong probably can outscore Adelaide, which is, I think, the way that this match would go. Like, there will be a lot of uncontested play, a lot of good ball movement, but, Geelong should be at risk of, like, sometimes Geelong muck around with it in their forward half too, as good as they are at distributing, which is where we saw Adelaide get a lot of runoff. So they'll be made to work, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Friday night's game, also at the Adelaide Oval. Collingwood and Sydney. The Brodie Grundy Cup, as it would be dubbed.
Yeah, can't keep Collingwood away from the bigger grounds. Let me tell you. Honestly, this one's also fairly hard to sort of predict.
I agree.
It's, I think, 1-on-1. Again, sort of edging towards Sydney. You know what I mean? Like, you think forward line, they, again, going to conventional. Like Collingwood, I think, can actually limit a few teams that like to score from their midfield. I know they're not the best two-way runners, but you know what I mean? It's not that much of a unique matchup for a team like Collingwood. Whereas, as I mentioned, Sydney with their forward line, they're probably looking to get Tom McDonald back. So you might see... you could see them getting a very tall lineup. It'll be interesting to see if Collingwood stick with coast to coast own Billy Frampton.
Yes.
Because they might threaten. So, it could be a good old school matchup. Probably a bit of dour movement, but I don't actually think Collingwood's been clean enough. And Sydney have been solid in their matches where they've been given opportunities from other teams not being clean. When Brisbane was struggling early, Sydney jumped the gun on them. They got into the match against Fremantle when they were starting to muck around with it. Obviously, against North, when they weren't doing much, they absolutely shut down their movements. So, again, I think Sydney is just going to get too many offensive looks. Whereas Collingwood probably could do a bit of damage. Be interested to see the one-on-one forward matchups, but they didn't quite look complete to me, despite their good record.
Yeah, I actually kind of agree on that one. I think I'm definitely leaning Sydney. In that case, they're going to be very good at shutting down Collingwood in terms of their distribution. When they make mistakes, they'll capitalize on it. They're very good at doing that, as you just said, and hopefully their forwards can fire and equate to at least a very solid game.
It's like, I think Collingwood can shut down Sydney's forwards, but they're probably... It might be one of those ones where, their forward lines might kick like 4 or 5 of their goals, and they'll just get enough from the outside sources, like we saw... I was about to say Sheldrick. Who's the one that kicked forward just for Sydney? Hayward.
Yes, Will Hayward.
As I said, Riley Bice, I think, even kicked a goal. You know what I mean? They just find it from outside stoppages.
Yeah, and also for the fact that Sydney have always kind of relied on their midfielders as well to do a lot of the heavy lifting. But now that they're able to develop their forwards a little bit more in the preseason, they're able to find a lot more opportunity up forward, especially when they don't have Papley in right now either. Yeah, they're still missing their big wing distributor in Goulden. So they're finding like these better opportunities from their forward line, and it's if they're able to keep that up, it can be a tough matchup for Collingwood's defense.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if it is actually a Brodie Grundy Cup too, because he has looked a bit off.
I did think his performance last weekend wasn't the greatest.
Yeah, like he had a lot of it, but he wasn't really, keeping up with the general play, I think. So, yeah, we'll see. But yeah, as I said, they could be relying on Peter Laddams, who had a mixed bag, to say the least, against the Roos.
Indeed, he did.
One of the shanks of the season. So, well, honestly, he's a bit like that, but hopefully he'll bounce back if he is playing.
Speaking
more ruck.
Speaking of the Roos, let's jump over to Saturday's game, the first ever AFL game down at the Barossa Valley. North Melbourne versus the Gold Coast Suns. How much do you think the Suns are going to win by?
Ooh. I'll tell you what, outside movement profile, the Suns are going to get a lot of their game going because, as I said, the Roos are still an inside team.
Mm-hmm.
How much the Suns midfield, who would probably be even in more form than the Roos, you know, how much of that matters to them, I don't know, but they're going to get movement from the outside. Yeah, I think for North, it's about limiting their tolls, I think, because more than last season, the Suns have incorporated a few more tolls into their attack. You know, Jed Walters has been peppering, Ben Long, you know, still being consistent. King has had a few games when he's been really good, so I think if they can limit a few of those, keep the scoreline close, they'll get a bit. But yeah, defensively, nah. It's just nah.
Yeah, it's a
Might be a
very
bit of a struggle.
easy lean to the Suns. Like I can't put as much faith into North this week as I did last week against Sydney because I think the Suns just look vastly superior.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean? It's like, I think North are going to struggle with offensive powerhouse teams. Like, you know, they even struggle with the Bulldogs at not full strength. You know, like, I don't think they're quite there. You know what I mean? Like,
no, they've definitely still got a while to go, but they, you know, they're trying to.
Well, they got
contend
some
at the very
players to
least.
get back.
Yeah, that too.
But you know what I mean? Like, they put North to the defensive sword. So I'm imagining up against a firing. Yeah, this is where North reach their limit for the year, I would imagine. But if they show that they can put up with it, maybe, you know, as I said, we start to get into the upper end of prospects for them. They need a solid stand against a good offensive team. I feel like they've only really ever kept with, you know, more, I don't want to say defensive teams, but you know what I mean? Like, teams that you wouldn't quite expect to rack up as big a score against.
Essentially, what they need to do in this game is pretty much what Richmond did with Brisbane. Is just compete against them, keep up with them. You don't necessarily have to win. Obviously, as a developing team, wins would be nice. But if you're able to contend, that's all you can. Like, it's the kind of the main goal you want to hope for in a young developing team.
Yeah. And look, if they get defensive efforts out of somewhere, you know, as Ed Clarko maybe says something on Monday, like I was not leading to, but like asking questions of, like, that would be great. I just don't quite see that this year. That's sort of a next year thing. Yeah. I said that's a step-by-step thing, but it is.
Yeah, this is a long-term prospect team right now. But yeah, a very obvious lean towards the Suns. That should be everyone's kind of basis. Now,
yeah. Talking about long-term prospects.
Long-term prospects. Both of these teams currently are indeed long-term prospects.
It's
welcome
long is a prospect.
Welcome to the Gather Round Spoon Bowl. Carlton and the West Coast Eagles.
Hosted on Adelaide Oval.
Yes, it is.
Of course.
Well, I want to say that this should be an easy win for Carlton. I want to say it. Do I believe it?
You want to?
I don't know.
Well, Eagles are going to let Carlton have enough opportunity. It's just, how much has Carlton just been struggling? I can't even say they've been good sides, but you know what I mean? Like, how much does anything negate each other? I think the odds of this are longer than it should be. But yeah, you'll need some clicking of the Eagles forward line, and I think Carlton's defense is just good enough to stave that off. Like, that's the only reason I'm confidently backing in Carlton. But their team defense has been shaky for a while, so a bad day the Eagles could win. But that's sort of where I'm at for this game. Is just Carlton would need to have an even worse day.
Yeah,
you know what? They've had bad days,
and I'm considering they're currently 0-4. You expect them to have some sort of fight back against the team that's 18th.
You would hope. Yeah, Eagles to me just seem a step away from AFL teams. Unfortunately,
it's a little bit tragic right now, but we've seen weirder things happen over the past couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, it'll be individuals that you sort of want to see from the Eagles because, again, team structure wise, it just comes and goes. Like, yeah, like especially if they don't get McGovern or Edwards back, they're going to really struggle again with their forwards. It's just, yeah, if Carlton don't take this opportunity, it's the cellar is the only way they deserve to be. So
Pretty much. So I mean, if I would suggest tipping wisely, but for the most part, it's probably Carlton is probably a safe tip here. I really struggle to put my
yeah,
faith in them right now.
I mean, unless you're tipping the Eagles, like when you have to tip like one team per year one team per round, and once you tip him, you can't. Was it? You have to tip one team correctly, to actually pass it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can only tip one per week. Yeah, that might be where you use the Eagle tip on, but even then, I think there's probably some more easier games down the road for them. Probably looking the back half of the year for those sort of things.
Yeah, I would think that. All right, jumping over to Norwood Oval for the Bulldogs and the Lions. This could be a very exciting matchup.
It could be, but it does sort of seem like forward half team and forward half team light. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like the Bulldogs, again, considering have been very good. And again, they might see some reward for effort in the back half of the season where they do open up. But yeah, this might be the pain that they just have to endure. I think they can make it respectable. Again, still a couple of weeks with some players coming back. So I don't think there's going to be any huge changes. And again, we'll see what happens with Latham Vandermeer. But, it's I think they can show signs against the Lions. Like the Lions haven't obliterated teams, you know what I mean? Like
They should have.
they haven't defensively shut down teams,
Yes, correct.
but they've just been offensively peppering along. And
They've
yeah, the
the
Bulldogs
Lions
aren't a
so far have
defensive
been
team.
kind of always one step ahead, but not like 4 steps ahead.
Yeah, again, they've been comfortable. So I imagine the Dogs as a team that they could probably be comfortable against.
Yeah, I agree.
They just don't have the defensive profile, but I don't think there's going to be a slacking or anything. I just think, again, it's just, the Lions are pretty much the team the Bulldogs want to be. So
Yeah,
that's always hard to come back
I think the
against.
Dogs can keep up, but I think the Lions will just have a clear sort of comfortable victory.
Yeah.
And then jumping over to, I don't know if this is really a Saturday night blockbuster, but Adelaide Oval once more for Melbourne and Essendon.
Invite the neighbors, get the DJ sets out, get the whole block going.
Get the
lazy.
charcuterie board.
Yeah, exactly. Look, honestly, it's so hard to judge this game. Like, you got Essendon, who, to be fair, they've only played one bad game. That being against who was it in the second round? It was someone.
I am blanking. It wasn't Port. They beat Port.
They beat Port.
Was it the Dogs? I can't remember.
Yeah, it might have been the Bulldogs. They didn't really fire a shot anyway. So, you know what I mean? Like, there's not much to say about that. But Melbourne have played more bad games, and in fact, they've been quite atrocious. Like, on paper, it should be Essendon. And it's not like Melbourne have faced too hard an opposition, too. You know what I mean? Like, but that being said, if there's a defense you want to, like...
It was the Crows. Sorry, I just had a look. It was the Crows.
Oh, it was the Crows. That's right. I think that's, pretty much dealt with. You know what I mean? It's like, I think this is the one where Essendon probably could. You know what I mean? Like, the Demons, they don't have that great an offense. Essendon have just minorly improved in that regard from what I've seen so far. And, if Melbourne can't get their forward line game going, you know what I mean? It will depend if Caldwell is back. I don't think he is. So it could be where personnel is probably the one deciding factor where I'd lean towards Melbourne, but honestly, I think the Dons can get it done.
Yeah, honestly, I'm kind of agreeing with you here. Like, it's not that I don't have faith in Melbourne; it's just we haven't seen enough from Melbourne to really warrant it.
Their defense is okay at times, but I think Smalls can sort of go against. You know what I mean? Like, on the ground level, you got Kako in the forward line. You got either, I think, Hobbs down there and a few others that are lifting a bit more than you would expect. So, hopefully. I don't know if I hope Essendon get it done. Like, I don't really care about these two teams at all. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But, just for the young team, getting a few wins that you wouldn't expect. Sort of like last year, you know what I mean? Essendon, I feel, can play ahead of their team list, whereas Melbourne, I think they're playing behind. So,
Yeah,
they might turn around.
I think Melbourne have a lot more they need to do in regards to just structure and setup and just straight up performance over Essendon right now. Before we jump
maybe
over...
get the better list, but
yeah, that too. Before we jump over to Sunday's games, the MRO report for Sunday's games just gone has finally come out, and I can see why. There is a lot of fines here, so I'm going to quickly run through them. So first off is Zach Butters. He is fined $1,000 for instigating a melee or wrestle. And then there is the melee/wrestle itself. So Connor Rozee was fined $1,875. Zach Butters for his third offense was fined $3,125. And then Georgiades, Jack McRae, and Nazea Wanganeen-Milera and Hugo Garcia all fined $1,000 for engaging in said melee/wrestle. Rowan Marshall, it's his third offense, so he was fined $3,125. Darcy Byrne-Jones he received a one-match ban for rough conduct on Ryan Burns. You did mention this earlier.
It's sort of one of those things where he didn't quite elect to bump, but he sort of made head-high contact. Like, it was sort of that awkward thing where a bit of it was timing, but a bit of it was
the MRO reports it
good positioning
as careless, but it was high contact. So it's fair.
That's sort of where I got it. Yeah.
Wanganeen-Milera was fined $1,000 for striking Georgiades. Jason Horne-Francis was fined $1,875 for, guess what? Careless contact with an umpire. And then over to there wasn't anything from the whatever the other game was on Sunday. We had
West Coast Giants?
Yes, there was nothing from that game. But for
Maybe
Fremantle,
didn't get started for tumbling.
No, didn't get done for it.
Interesting.
And then for the Freo and Bulldogs match, there were two. Alex Pearce was fined $2,000 for headbutt or contact using head on Josh Dolan. And Oscar Baker received a one-match ban for rough conduct on Andrew Brayshaw. Again, this was careless contact. Careless, but it was high contact. So,
yeah. If you're out of the league because you didn't watch the flogging, Toby Green, he's sort of half in a marking contest. He didn't go up to try and mark the ball, and he was looking directly at, that was Owies, who I mentioned earlier.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think there was much he could do, but because he looked at him, didn't make any action to pull out of the contest and tunneled him, I thought he was going to get a week or two for sure, but...
No, yeah.
Who knows, maybe he'll get contested at the tribunal. But...
in the MRO, but...
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Very lucky there. I don't think there's much he could do, though. It would be very hard to pull out your body, but I feel like he could have done something to minimize the amount of damage done in that situation.
Probably. Nevertheless, we still have 3 more games to quickly go over. So jumping over to this Sunday, April 13th, we're going back down to the Barossa Valley for the Shai Bolton Cup of Richmond and Fremantle.
Yeah, again, Fremantle, with their outside movement, I think they can really damage Richmond, because as we mentioned, Richmond's inside midfield can sort of, well, I can't say they'll do okay, but you know what I mean, like, they at least scrap.
Yeah.
Whereas they struggle with outside movement. We saw that against Port, we saw that big against Brisbane, and that's where the Dockers can excel. So, again, I can see clear avenues for victory for Fremantle. It's just how scrappy can Richmond make it be, because Fremantle do like avenues, you know, they like working the angle. So if they can maintain some discipline, they can at least try and make this like a low scoring contest, but I can't imagine Richmond winning.
I would like a win, obviously, but as long as we can contend, as long as we can keep it close, I would be very happy with that. against Fremantle, who, are very much approaching the, top 8 sort of status. That's what they're working towards.
Yeah, top 8 sort of status, and yeah, as I said, last couple of matches haven't been close at all, so yeah, hopefully they can back-to-back losses last year in the doubleheader by about 50 points. So sort of expect, again, shave that back to 30 points and I reckon you're happy.
Yeah, pretty much. Over to Norwood Oval is St Kilda and the Giants. This one, if St Kilda, play their game, this could be an extremely close match.
Yeah, well, I'd put, if I had to take 2 matches for match of the round, it would got to be Adelaide, Geelong, and this match. Because, again, St Kilda, more opportunist with ball movement. GWS, more grinding with ball movement. So it's one of those things where both teams can simultaneously get their game plan going. Because GWS, not always the cleanest movers off the back half, but tend to overwhelm team, whereas St Kilda, they do like a good back half turnover. They've got a lot of fast players like Wangani, Malira, Hill, running off halfback that can convert for them. Again, though, it's that marking presence, with Hogan warmed up. I think that will probably be the difference between the two. But, you know what? I'm just going to say it as like a weird prediction. I think the amount of goals Jesse Hogan gets is probably the difference between the two teams in terms of margin.
Yeah, I absolutely
weirdest prediction you'll hear this week.
And I genuinely agree with it because he's just that good right now. Like that's the reality of it. You get the ball in his hands, he's likely to convert.
Well, it's just such a good mark, and I don't think St Kilda have the body to go. They could put Wilkie as like a strong, one-on-one defense, but then that takes away from St Kilda's defense overall. So it's like, you got to choose what you got to concede in these situations. Because again, I've sung praises against their backline from last week, and it's been different, but they've made do with it. But as I said, you've got to choose your losses sometimes, and I don't think they're going to win in that specific thing. But it's all about making their own opportunities as well. Might not be the highest scoring game. I imagine there's going to be a lot of pressure. But yeah, as I said, Hogan's probably the avenue. This is real Fox Footy Channel 7 commentary analysis, but it really is in this sort of matchup, I think.
Yeah, especially as much as we currently admire St Kilda's versatility up forward, the fact that they have so many interesting opportunities and they take those opportunities when they can, it's not the same as when you have a key full forward who knows how to take marks, regardless of the weather. So it seems like, and is able to convert 90% of the time.
Exactly,
and that's exactly how we reach.
Maybe they look a bit more like that. Yeah, sorry. I was gonna say maybe they look a bit more like that when they get King back, but that's just sort of an aim for them. Whereas GWS is that sort of team. Plus, they have Cadman, Brown, Riccardi, sort of adding to that. So
Stringer, once Stringer eventually, finds his form again.
Oh, more in terms of tall marking.
Oh, yeah.
Stringer's more ground level, so yeah.
Yeah, he's more of the Toby Green sort of role.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, honestly, genuine game of the round right there. But you'd probably have to give it definitely to the Giants in that favor.
Yeah.
And then last one, Port Adelaide versus Hawthorn. Sunday night. What a weird time slot this is. At the Adelaide Oval.
Twilight, can't get them too excited, with all the
revenge grudge match of 2024.
Yeah. So exactly. So you know what I mean. Make sure they go to bed tired, sort of deal. But honestly, I mean, I'm tipping Port, but Hawthorn have been pretty good.
Yes, they have, and they're coming off of a bye as well, so they're rested.
Yeah, Port have had the last 3 wins, which is nice.
Well,
2 of those coming from last year. The other one being
that was round 20 something, then the final, and a match earlier in the season?
2023. Nah, around 23. The other one was the women's game. That was the 3.
Oh yeah, that's
Port
right.
Adelaide victories over Hawthorn.
That's right. So two out of the 3 were in the men's.
Yeah. But as I said, the other one, in terms of the last 3 for the men's, was when Hawthorn were pretty middling.
Yes, that's true.
I say for Port Adelaide, again, in terms of sort of limiting outside movement opportunities, they're not actually too bad at that. Like, I know they allow bad movement, and I imagine that the opportunities that the Hawks will get, they'll like tear through.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine, again, Port Hat aside, Hawthorn by like 30 or something. I don't think it'll be like a blowout, but I don't think Port will be in it again. But, as I said, optimistically, I think you're looking at, it's sort of if Port can get their outside game movement, I think legitimately head-to-head in the midfield, like, their inside matchups are never the problem. It's getting the most out of it. So, players like Newcomb, they might be able to curb a bit more. Day, I don't think will bother them too much. It's just, again, how much damage are the small, quicker players of Hawthorn going to do to Port Adelaide, who just can't keep up with the fast pace at the moment?
Yeah, that's the big question: is how much influence are they going to have? You got your Wizard, you got your Ginnivan, you got your D'Ambrosio on the wing.
Well, especially since, even Watson, I was going to say, he's pushing up a lot this year, and that's where you can do a bit of damage, in that sort of offensive transition. Against Port Adelaide, like to take the game on, but are prone to a lot of turnovers.
Yeah, not to mention you've also got Sicily now floating forward as well. Like that strong presence up there.
Yeah, I think Port can defend that, though. They're never really that bothered by
Yeah, but he's also very hot-headed and ready to throw a fist at any time.
Oh, yeah, I reckon there's going to be a few fines in this game. And that's not just because of the pure head. Like, you know what I mean? It, took Butters 1 game to get back on the fines list. So, making up for lost time.
Look, they're both still trying to take on Toby Green's mantle. Like, give him some credit.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like, I wish I had that much money to, lose on fines. You know what I mean?
Well, you want to hope
I wish I could, it's a nonchalant.
You want to hope it's something that just goes towards an umpire's holiday at the end of the season or something like that.
But you know what I mean? It's like you see them start melees and all that, knowing they're going to lose a bit of money, and I'm like, man, I wish I could just lose $5,000 on a whim. They'll be living the life.
Absolutely, that'd be like heaven on it. Just be able to piss away $5,000 right then and there.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'd rather just use that $5,000 to build a new computer.
I'd rather the $5,000. But, as I said, it's that sort of luxury. But honestly, Butters could probably fully set in a while. But again, I'm sort of drifting off because I don't think there's too much. Anything I think is just bioscoping. But I do like to, as a Port supporter, provide avenues where I think that there could be a bit more hope. But yeah, on a pure tipping, there's no reason why you should really be tipping Port Adelaide. Yeah. I will consign myself to it, but I wouldn't recommend that for others.
Yeah, as much as you want to kind of hope there's some sort of home ground advantage here, I don't think it's going to matter at all. Especially when you look at the performances they currently had at home, and they're not the greatest, really.
Yeah, or even the last year, they haven't been, especially the prelims and all that, they've never been dominant at Adelaide Oval. Yeah, so it's been a long time since I've added the word portress.
It's been, well, I mean, we're not really kings of the jungle right now either at the MCG, so.
Yeah. Yeah, you always know when you got a bit of a home streak going when you bust out the stadium's nickname.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, I believe that does it for this week's episode. Thank you all so much for coming to hang out, coming to chat, coming to watch, coming to listen, coming to like and subscribe. It always means a lot if you give the channel and the episodes some love. Next week will obviously be the rundown of Gather Round, highs and lows, any big information that comes out from that as well, and obviously a preview for round 6. There will be no more buys, thankfully, after this, up until the official middle of the season buy rounds, which are I think it's 12, 13, 14, or 13, 14, 15, something like that. So we'll have a good stretch of games to be able to cover, hopefully some very entertaining ones coming up. So we're very much looking forward to that. Hopefully Gather Round has some great weather, so we're not having to deal with slogs of wet weather games. I don't know what the forecast is like. I'm not even going to bother to look right now because it's not currently important because weather will change all the time. But yes, thank you all so much. If you're interested in just seeing what we do, go check out our socials. Go check out my socials. I'm active there all the time with all the other projects that I'm working on. So if you're interested, please go come check that out. Otherwise, thank you all so much once again. We will love you all and leave you all and see you all next week for episode 54 of the podcast. Until then, take care.